Your time on hold without the host has expired. Please confirm the scheduled time and conference code, then try again. Thank you and goodbye. Hello, please enter your 6-digit conference code. Welcome to VAST Conference. The conference has not started. If you are the host, please enter your 4-digit host code to open the conference. If you are not the host, please press the star key to connect to the conference and wait. We will now connect you to your call. Your host has yet to join. Thank you for waiting.
Okay, I'm finna start the commercial.
Pick up your copy of the Son of Man Speaks magazine today. With the Son of Man Speaks magazine, you'll receive
Conference recording started.
financial advice and, most importantly,
It's the camera.
true understanding of the Word of God. Get your copy of the Son of Man Speaks.
Tell them to switch to this camera.
Sisters Afraid 2, 18070 Mount Elliott. The Shell gas station, 13110 West 7 Mile Road. To get a subscription, call 601-786-978. That's 601-786-978. The Son of Man Speaks magazine. Dedicated to becoming free indeed. Attention, brothers and sisters, viewers and listeners, now available. Your Son of Man Speaks Magazine digital subscription. Your digital subscription to the Son of Man Speaks Magazine will also include our monthly newsletter, both delivered to your inbox. If you have any questions regarding the digital magazine subscription or digital newsletter, you may send an email to ShabazPrinting@thenewnationofislam.com. That's ShabazPrinting@thenewnationofislam.com. Or call 1-601-786-9788. That's 1-601-786-9788. You can also subscribe online. Visit www.thenewnationofislam.com and click on the magazine tab to register for your online subscription. We would like to invite you to help support the efforts of the Unity and Rebuilding Fund. Visit the website at www.unityandrebuildingfund.com. That's www.unityandrebuildingfund.com. We often hear how we need to work together to rebuild the city. We're actually doing it. You can make online donations and click on links to track the progress of the Unity and Rebuilding Fund. And for more information, 313-868-0000 is a local number. Again, 313-868-0000 support the Unity and Rebuilding. To make your online time offerings, donations, gifts to the Son of Man who cash out, make your payment to $New Nation of Islam. That's $New Nation of Islam. Or call 601-786-7056. 601-786.
The reason that's blurred is because it's too close up.
The Curls and Combo Natural Hair Summit
You
is a 5-hour jam-packed event that serves to empower our community along their hair journey. You will have access to a host of licensed hair care professionals and beauty experts under one virtual group. By creating the Curls and Combo Natural Hair Summit, I aim to break the norms set by society and redefine beauty standards for melanated individuals. Through Design by Beach and the movement, the Natural Hair Summit, I am dedicated to providing a space that boosts confidence and self-love while championing the natural hair movement. Together, we empower one another.
I think it needs to be zoomed back some. Don't move the camera.
Consider this your formal invitation to attend the third annual Curls and Combo Natural Hair. Grab your ticket and join us.
No, I say zoom out. Yeah. Nah, that's it.
5 p.m. Central. See you there.
Yeah, I think that's a little better.
Now you got to keep your work done.
Huh?
He's got the border on him.
Well, I got the border around right here. Huh? Oh, in there it ain't the same as on here. Okay. Keep it where you had it.
And still couldn't find the one that echoed how you felt? Well, search no more.
So this TV don't feel like it really is. Oh, okay. All right. Now I told you, don't let me come up here and tell y'all how to do your job. Hey, all you have to do is tell me that ain't gonna do nothing.
We also have cards for special occasions. We are the one-stop shop for unique and three-dimensional handmade greeting cards for all occasions.
So he makes it light and dark with you?
We also make custom orders.
Oh, all right.
Every card is custom.
Okay.
The hotline ID is 601-451-9533. Or our website, www.designbybeach.com.
Year-around landscaping has been serving Metro Detroit for over 20 years, offering various landscaping, lawn care, property maintenance, and home renovation opportunities. clients as our only client before, during, and after providing our services. We believe in building solid relationships with our clients and ensuring their satisfaction. Whether you need a complete outdoor makeover, indoor renovation, or routine maintenance, we have the expertise and resources to deliver outstanding results. Our team is committed to providing exceptional service and completing every project to the highest standards. To schedule an estimate or consultation, please call us at 248-843-6139 or visit our website at year-round-landscaping.net. Year-round landscaping, one source, unlimited resources.
For carpet, floor, and upholstery cleaning, call Supreme Steam Clean. For pressure washing on your house and driveway, call Supreme Steam Cleaning. Flooding in your house or building, Supreme Steam Clean got you covered with our emergency water extraction services. Transform the room to your home with floor installation, repairs, and more. Give us a call today at 601-720-5138. That's 601-720-5138. Visit our website, www.supremesteamclean.com, and follow us on social media at Supreme Steam Clean. When you need an elite team, call Supreme.
SOS Graphic Design provides agency-quality professional graphic design services from established companies to startups and individuals, creating a simple logo to complete rebranding and delivering visual communication for print media. Everything SOS Graphic Design does has a single unifying objective: set your business apart. We are at your service. Call 313-342-2166, 313-342-2166, or online at www.sosgraphicdesign.com.
Did you dim the light?
Are your clothes coming apart at the seams? Universal Seamstress and Tailoring has got you covered. At Universal Seamstress and Tailoring, we specialize in a wide variety of alterations and transformations to make and keep your clothes looking and fitting their best. From hem jobs to downsizing suits and dresses are a perfect fit to replacing zippers and buttons. Universal Seamstress and Tailoring is your one-stop shop for clothing needs. Also, do you have a logo for your clothes you'd like to wear? Universal Seamstress and Tailoring can put it there. That's right. At Universal Seamstress and Tailoring, we not only do alterations, but embroidery as well. Shirts, pants, coats, hats, even bags. If you can wear it, we can embroider it. So remember, whether it be alterations or embroidery you need, Universal Seamstress and Tailoring has got you covered. Universal Seamstress and Tailoring is located at 1404 Main Street, Fayette, Mississippi. Come and see us with a call at 601-786-0543.
That's why I said let's come up here early. All right.
Check out the new Sisters Braid 2 Hair Braiding and Natural Hair Care Salon, located at 18070 Mount Elliott Street. Our new salon is spacious with adequate parking, Wi-Fi, and all brand new state-of-the-art salon equipment. Come meet your local hair braiders and natural hair care specialists, and check out our many hair care services such as hair treatment, box braids, bun rolls, tree braids, cabana twists, children's braids, natural twists, lock extensions, kinky twists, goddess locks, updos, wool weaves, and more. Please feel free to visit us on the web at www.sistersbraid2.com or call 313-826-0498. Here at Sisters Braid 2, we offer exceptional care for exceptional hair. We look forward to seeing you. Sisters Braid 2 is a proud recipient of the Unity and Rebuilding Fund.
Oh man, the power's out again.
You are free to follow construction and engineering, your number one
generator, your life goes on uninterrupted with power when you need it. Not to mention the peace of mind of having your property saved to weather the storm. Whoever would have thought in Houston, Texas, that we would have an ice storm? It did happen, and that Sunday night when it came in, I got up and looked at the front door, everything was pitch dark. It was hard. Something out of a novel or science book that you had once seen before. Once the lights went out, my generator popped on. It ran 55 hours. Don't lose have lights. Your backup generator installed with quality construction. We install both residential and commercial generators, but you're always covered. Schedule a consultation with us by calling 1-855-876-9370. That's 1-855-876-9370. Or visit us online at www.power2ec.com. That's www.power2ec.com. Financing is available with low monthly payments and 0% interest for 18 months. That was the best investment that we could have ever made. That's my bag of the generator. Generator is quality construction. Built tough enough to weather the storm. Capital Area Planning offers a variety of services catered to your land development needs. We offer landscape design, residential design, land planning, mapping and consulting services, and more. We have over 20 years of design and land planning experience. CAPS LLC offers services to developers, builders, architects, surveyors, contractors, government agencies, and private landowners. Feel free to contact us to find out what services are available in your area. You may reach us at 601-326-2966. That's 601-326-2966. You can also visit us on the web at www.llconline.com. Let us home Arkansas Catch to serve your land development needs.
It ain't giving you nothing? Just a moment. Let me make sure.
Try that stage so you're clear on what you're.
It's coming to this one. You turned it off. It's not getting nothing out here. It's not out here. What happened to this? Sir? Y'all cut this one off. What happened? No, he said he didn't. Well, something cut it off.
Yeah, we were, I didn't hear noise, so you get off.
Okay.
1-888-99. Scriptural Discussion with the Son of Man.
Whatever he turned up back there.
Bring it back one more time.
Okay, just a moment.
You don't want to just go one more time.
Now you need to give it some volume. Give it some volume. Give it some volume.
It's up high. That's how you got that stuff.
Well, I turned it down so you can turn that up back there. But it was fine before you turned it up back there.
Let me just raise the volume.
It's already up?
You can also listen via conference call at 601-909-9135. The access code is 968-280.
The Tyler boy is the one that's doing
909-9135. And access code is 968-280.
There is something that you're
Are we ready to start, or you want me to run it again?
All right. We're going to use HDMI.
Huh?
We're just going to use it.
Okay, let me turn this other speaker off. It'll be perfect, but it'll be better than what we can say.
Estimate of what you read,
Yeah,
and
that's
you're
better.
reasonably sure you ever tested that what you feel.
Don't hold it twice.
Someone
Don't
has.
hold it
If you made your own, then let's talk with one another. Then let's reason with one another. Scriptural Discussion with the Son of Man every Wednesday at 9 p.m.
Go back there and
Friday at 9 p.m.
and then I'll move it
at 12 noon on WHPR TV Detroit Live 88.1 FM WHPR and Comcast Cable. Why don't you call and discuss the Holy Bible, and if you have one, the Holy Quran, and come to an agreement about the Holy Scriptures and their true meaning? You can call that line on the air at area code 313-868-4336, 313-868-0342, or 313-868-0335.
Okay, is it okay?
313-868-4336, 313-868-0342, or 313-868-0351. And now, let's go live with a scriptural discussion with the Son of Man.
I'll gauge it right here. So we put the leg on.
Okay. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful, the Truthful, and the Most Just. I greet all of you once again who are hungry, thirsty for the true understanding of the Word of God and for the truth in general. I greet you all with the greeting words of peace. May Allah's Salam Alaikum. Before we get into that special counsel motion tonight, I want to take up something with whoever wants to discuss something with me. Of questions or disagreements or whatever. Brother Tamar, what it look like?
We don't have anybody tonight, sir.
Okay. Now, I have a surprise for you all. I found something online that, many of us, we sometimes think that we don't want to hear something because it's coming from the wrong person's mouth. But I found, as I went online, I found a recital of the motion that special counsel filed concerning to make a determination about the immunity of Donald Trump. And I thought I would let you hear that instead of me reciting it. I'll let someone who is I thought they did a much better job than I've done as far as the consistency and the way that the recital went. And so I'm going to start it from scratch and let you hear it. And then we'll go from there. Just a moment.
The following is the reading of the recently unsealed court filing from special counsel Jack Smith's federal election case against Donald Trump. Parts of the text have been edited for clarity and ease of listening.
Oh, now before I let it play. Now, Firewatch. Now, understand something. The messenger said this about, it has dawned on me that there's a lot of things that I heard the messenger say that I'm just now starting to piece together. Because he said, I say to you, if you don't know the truth by now, I say to you, goodbye. Now, I was one. This was before the internet now. This was before these computers and before all of this false news and all of this stuff came out. But the Bible says that those that had it says the devil. Now the devil, that's an acronym for deviser of illusion. Now remember now, you got to keep up in this class. I don't mind repeating myself. But if you are not clear on what I mean by what I say, you need to stop me and ask. Don't let me keep talking and you're not clear on what I'm saying. Did I agree to everybody? Okay. I have so much on my mind that, it's a lot of things that I want you to hear. Now, the messenger, when he said that, there was no internet. But you notice this QAnon and all of these fake people calling themselves news outlets that ain't nothing but propaganda outlets. The old saying was the first one cackle is the one that laid the egg. Who first got on there calling MSNBC and CNN and those that start calling them fake news? Well, actually, when he was saying fake news, he was telling his backers what to start doing. And that's QAnon and all of this stuff, all these people coming up with these lies that they're making up. The bigger lie you tell, the bigger lie you got to tell to cover them. Until, you got Marjorie Taylor Greene come out there the woman said that they controlling the weather. But she doesn't, she suggested that the Biden administration is controlling the weather. I mean, good gracious. But anyway, well, if you're going to say they doing it, make sure you say that it's God doing it. God and his angels, they weren't controlling all of this stuff. I even told you that. I told you I ain't the one making these storms happen. They've just been ordered to fight on my side. That's what the scripture tells you. That he had saved the snow and the hail, had reserved it against the time of trouble that you living in now. This is the time of trouble and tribulation. And the day of battle and war. In righteousness, I judge and make war. You notice, when you judge, you begin to make assessments of things. You notice, that's why they call it judge and judge. That's what he does when he's sitting on that bench. He listens to both sides presenting evidence. And then when one objects to something the other one did, the judge says sustained, or the judge says overruled. And that's that. And remember in A Few Good Men, and the woman said, yes, John, but we strenuously object. The judge had a rule of the council, and I move on. So, it lets you understand that once a judge makes a ruling, that's that. It's just like me. When I make a ruling, Allah said he can uphold whatever I say. And that's it. Now, you may not like it, but ain't nothing you're going to do about it. I told you that all these people that want to get on this Trump bandwagon and support a known liar, you're going to get what he gets for supporting it. Just like they do in this world. You don't participate in a bank robbery and then when they get caught, claim innocence. No. If you helped in any way, you were complicit. You were an accomplice. So, likewise. I'll let you hear Liz Cheney. She didn't just say get rid of Donald Trump. She said you got to get rid of all of his enablers that's in Congress. And she was right. She ain't no dummy, that's for sure. Now, so I saw this online. I said, man, that's a good thing. Because, I know how some of us are. I don't want to see people destroyed for no reason. It's just like when the person asked me to pray for people, my prayers were already said for people who want what's right. But these people who are trying to destroy this country, you see, Allah can thread the needle. He can make the sun shine on the just and the unjust, as he has been doing. But it can give skin cancer as well as it can give warmth. The same sunlight. So you support lies. The scripture says that the devil, the deviser of illusion, a deviser is that part of a mathematical equation that you put into a greater number. You see? And just like Donald Trump, he's a deviser of illusion. He's a devil. He puts false understanding into the minds of unsuspecting and sometimes people who welcome it. The mark of the beast is the characteristics of the beast. What is a beast? A beast is a dumb creature, as you call them, dumb animals, a dumb beast. He can't speak. He cannot converse with you. You know, all y'all that claim this white supremacy garbage, yet you can't come in here and converse with me about it. Because all of your so-called white supremacy is based on nothing but false information, lies. And so you dumb me up when I invite you to come in here and to talk to me about my inferiority and your superiority. So all a beast can do, because he can't talk, he can't reason with you. So he growls at you, barks at you, or makes crazy noises or whatnot to try to frighten you into silence. So everybody with the mark of the beast. Now, you notice when they're looking for civilizations that were around thousands of years ago, they say they dig and sometimes they unearth themselves over time, because what's up underneath is constantly turning over. But they say, we found the marks of a civilization under here. But they found things, artifacts or pieces of a building or whatnot that that showed characteristics of something that was made by man. It's not no natural occurrence. It's something that was made by man, and they call it the marks of a civilization. Well, the characteristics of something is the marks of that thing. And so the book says everyone that had the mark of the beast, the characteristic, the character of the beast. You know what a beast is. It's just like when you see people that they don't want as they say, I don't want my tax money spent on health care for all these lazy folks. Well, that's someone who does not think. Because if they thought, they would have realized that the people that they don't want their tax money spent on for something that may help those people, and them too, them same people pay taxes too. But they don't think like that. It's just like a beast. He go and eat up another creature's offspring and feed it to his offspring. And he don't give it a second thought, because he's a dumb beast. He has no conscience. It's just like they hear the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, a beautiful document. I don't care if white people was the one that it came through, it's still a beautiful document. It's a true declaration that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. The Bible says the same thing. And God made all nations of men from one blood. All men are created from one blood. All men are created equal. And are endowed by certain and inalienable rights. They say and, but I'm just certain inalienable rights. The right to life. It does not. If you got the right to life in a civilized society, you got the right to health care. You can't say a person has the right to life, but they ain't got the right to health care. Because without health care, you are denying them the right to life. But you don't care, because you're a beast. Oh yeah, I'll show you what you are. You see, you can get mad all you want, but you won't be killing me. When these hurricanes and tornadoes and stuff, they had a tornado outbreak. for all you bad actors out there. It's stuff coming, man. Anyway, anybody got something to say to me, you make sure you stop me and let me talk to that person. I ain't running from you. Now, I heard this, I had to get that said. It said the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of what will make them happy. It's just like the money that they gave these rich people off of taxes. Now they're using that same money to try to push Donald Trump and all these crooks into destroying the very country that made them rich. I'm just telling you the truth. You know, they are like the AIDS virus, getting off in some little corner somewhere with their sick plans of rule the world, and the only thing getting in the way is the democratic republic that God saw fit to bring into existence through their forefathers. And since they don't honor their forefathers, and they don't, that's why they dishonor the flag that their forefathers were given. They dishonor the history of their forefathers. They even lie about the noble part of the history of their forefathers. They have to deny it in order to do the things they're doing. You heard Donald Trump try to compare himself to Abraham Lincoln or George Washington. And they, instead of them feeling insulted by him doing that, they pat him on the back and laugh and tell him, keep going, Donald. Yeah. You know, when people can't live up to your standard, to the standard that you set, then the only thing they can do is try to take your standard away so that they can look good. Do you understand? Okay. So that's what they do. They try to turn you. I told you, can't no outside government overthrow the United States. It has to be done from within by the people of the United States. And the way you get the people of the United States to overthrow their own selves, to overthrow their own government, is to us, to black people. Why are black people so hateful of each other? That was done to us in slavery. That's why we hate each other so much. Then you see Django Unchained. Them two brothers fighting each other, and the other one told him after he got the best of him, he told him to take the hammer, okay, finish it. And he killed the man for the pleasure of the enslaver. Donald Trump was sitting up watching white people attack white people and calling white people traitors, calling the police that was protecting the Capitol and the members of the House of Representatives, or the members of Congress that covers both houses. The attackers were calling the police, asking them to join with them to overthrow the government. The government that gave them the right to stand up there on the ellipse and talk against the government and express themselves, that same government that they say is oppressive, allowed them to stand there and say all of that. But they took it too far. You had the freedom of speech, but you ain't got the freedom speak and incite people to overthrow the very government that gave you the freedom to speak. Why can't you convince people that this government's way is not the best way? I mean, if you got something better, why don't you present it? But you ain't got nothing better. It's just that the standards that this government sets is higher than your little sick mind will allow you to rise, and you're too trifling and lazy to increase your knowledge so that you can live up to the proper standard. So your answer is, well, I'm going to overthrow it. Yeah? You better make sure you understand who set this thing in motion. When you try to undo something that God did, that's a fool's errand. All right. But there's a lot of pharaohs out there, as the book says, Pharaoh, he decided he could stop what God started. Okay. But anyway, now I want you to, did anybody have something? If someone disagrees with something I said, I'm not like those other people that you used to listening to. Look, if I couldn't discuss intelligently the things that I say, I wouldn't say them. Now, do you have something that you want to take up with me on what I've been saying? It's just like people ask me to pray for somebody that wouldn't leave when the people that they elected to stay behind. You want me to pray for them? My prayers were answered when the true officials of that state gave all of those people ample warning and gave them plenty time to get their head on straight and to get out of the way, because they told them this hurricane is going to be deadly and you need to get out of here. Don't tell me they couldn't afford to get out. That's a stupid statement. It's like saying you in the middle of a highway, and not just a highway. You on the Indianapolis track, the Indianapolis 500, and you somehow got so drunk you wandered out on or you got so stupid you walked out on the track. And the people are telling you, hey man, you can't stay out there. Get out the way. These cars gonna run you over. And you got up there. I can't afford to get out of the way. Okay, can't afford to get out of the way. The thing you should be saying is you can't afford not to get out of the way. Whatever you call yourself gonna stay behind and protect. Unless you know something I don't know. They don't take U-Hauls to the cemetery when they're burying people. What good is all of those things going to do you if you get killed? Your belongings ain't gonna mean nothing, eh? So the God answered the prayer for people who listened to the warning. The prayer was already answered. You got to move out the way. This thing gonna hurt you. This thing could kill you. But I can't afford to move. Oh, okay. Noah's people said they wasn't gonna believe it. Yeah. Okay. Well, suit yourself. Anyway, so don't ever ask me to do something that makes no sense, because I'm not going to play along to just get along with you. You taught me the story of the man who was in a flood, and they sent him a four-wheeler came after him, and he said, "That's all right. The Lord gonna take care of me." And then the water got higher, and they sent a boat in there to get him, and he told them, "That's all right. The Lord gonna take care of me. You ain't got to worry about me." And went to the helicopter because he was on the roof of his house, because the water had got up to that high. And he sent the helicopter away. And so in the end of the story, as the man, now I'm changing it a little bit because you don't know nothing after you dead. But in the end, when just before he was about to drown, he had a conversation in his mind. Lord, why don't the Lord help me? And then he thought about it. A four-wheeler came after you, a boat came after you, and a helicopter came after you, and you sent them all the way. Who did you think was sending them things after you? You dying because you were spooky. You dying because you ignored help when it came to you. Yet, all your life, you've been saying God works through people. You know God works through people. And every time people came that God was working through, you turned them down. So, anyway, I'm going to let that do for now. And I'm going to let you hear this. Now, this is the thing I was saying about AI. And this is the thing I'm saying about the internet. Now, when you understand that electricity is fire, think now. You notice everything around you now it works by fire. And so the book says the devil and his angels, his messengers, everyone who tells lies are messengers of the devil. See, God is the truth. That's in the Holy Quran, chapter 22, and it's in the Bible, the book of John, the first chapter. It says, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. Okay. Now, you know the Word is the truth. In the beginning was the truth, and the truth was with God, and the truth was God. Okay, the Holy Quran says that is because, this is the 22nd chapter and the 6th verse. That is because Allah, He is the truth. Well, that's where you get people get upset now, you see, because they don't want God to be He. But the scripture told you in the 14th verse of the first chapter of John, after telling you that the Word is God, then it says, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. And we, meaning, see, we done got a lot of people in trouble. Because every time somebody, an ignorant person, or an ignorant person, I mean a person that thinks that we always means we. When they hear the term we, they thought they were talking about them too. And sometimes we don't mean us. And sometimes we means them. Do you understand? And so, what happened? What's wrong? sometimes we means them and not us. And so it says the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Well, if you read the 9th chapter of Isaiah and the 6th verse, it says, for unto us a child is born. Unto us a son is given. And the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. And of the increase of his government and peace, there shall be no end. So, the book says, and the Word, this is John again, back to John, the 14th verse of the 1st chapter. And the Word was made flesh. So now God is in person now. As it says, he was clothed with flesh. The Word now, instead of just being on a page, has now been put in flesh and blood. It's clothed with a vesture that has to stay dipped in blood. And that's who I am. I know you don't like it. You don't want to hear that. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, that man on the left of your screen there with that fez on with the crescent and star on it and with the crescent and star on his shoulder. He told you that the black man, he meant one of us in particular. He said the black man is God. Why? The black man is the one that the truth is with. What black man? The black man that God said he was going to create. He said, I'm going to create a mortal of sounding clay, of black mud, fashioned into the shape of a slave. And when I have made him complete and breathed into him of my word, let all the angels make obeisance to him. And then he said to the people, let all the people bow down with the angels who bow down. That's why I needed the scriptures with me, so that you would see that all of the messengers of God, they bore witness to me. And if you bear witness to them, you have to bow to who they bow to. And they all bowed to me. So I ain't gonna, that's not even up for argument. Because you can't produce an argument that they will help you against me. No prophet will help you against me. They told you to look for me. They told you that when I come, they would be with me. That's why you were told, don't speak of my servants as dead, for they are alive, or those who are slain in the way of Allah, in the way of bringing the truth, and then the world hated them and murdered some and mistreated them, and they died for this truth that they brought, warning you that one day the Lord himself would come. And that's me. Now you take it or leave it. I'm not here to beg you, but I am here to let you voice your disagreement and show me why you should not follow me. You should not accept me. Come in and show me some facts that justify your rejection of me. And I'm not just talking to the people in the United States. I'm talking to the people all over the earth. Because I'm the Lord of the whole earth. Now, I want to say this. I also know that with this climate in the U.S. of racism and bigotry and this lake of fire that we done all been walking around in here on this internet. But that's what the internet is. It's a lake of fire. It's not truly people conversing with each other. It's people speaking to each other with fire. That's what the internet is. It's electronic. It's an electrical fire. And if you don't know the truth, people, there is mischief-making people deceiving you on the internet, and you going down and down and down. Your IQ and everything is being diminished. That's why most of you, when you type to me, it's incoherent, gibberish, or you done learned you're so lazy that you won't even spell words out. You instead of saying you should do this or you should do that, you put the letter U, and then SHLD, and you abbreviate and whatnot until you've lost your communicative skills. Because the less you have dialogue, real dialogue with your fellow human beings,
conversing with each other,
the
people
less
speaking to each
you
other
are capable
with fire.
of having it.
That's what they.
Until pretty soon, all you can do is write notes. And even those notes make no sense. See, that's the problem with using the fire to communicate. When you use the internet to communicate, them typewriter keys and that screen ain't gonna tell you, hey man, that ain't right what you just said there. You deceive yourself into thinking that everything you print is right.
Your fellow human
beautiful
beings.
thing, you. Well, now you're going down in a lake of fire. Everybody with the mark, the characteristics of
all
the
you
beast
can do is write notes.
went down with the beast in a lake that burneth with fire and brimstone. So now I think we got a station ID. So I'm going to do a station ID, and then I'm going to let you hear this perfect recital of from what I can see, it's a perfect recital of the motion. I can't hear nothing out here.
Detroit. FM 88.1 WHPR, Highland Park. WVIE 107.3 FM Charlotte, Amalia, Virgin Islands.
Okay. Well, now that we've explained to you, y'all need to hit this speaker, cut it back off. Now that we've explained the lake of fire to you, it's time now that I show you that I'm walking around. It's like, remember Daniel? Pardon me. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was cast into a furnace of fire. But they wasn't getting burnt because even though the king had only cast 3 of them in there, when the guards came to him and said, well, there's 4 men walking around in there. And one of them looked like the Son of Man. And that's what's going on now. I told you, everybody that trusts me, everyone that believes in me, you will be in this world, but this world, you ain't going down with it. You just stay with me. Stay behind me. I don't care where you live. You can live in Alaska. You can live, I don't care if you live in, if it was possible, on the moon. If you really are a believer in me, you're going to be safe. So now, let's listen to, I'm finna cut to the motion now. And this is what I heard, and I thought I would let you hear it.
The recording was produced using an artificial voice generator. In the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, United States of America versus Donald J. Trump, defendant, criminal number 23 CR 257 PSC. Government's motion for immunity determinations. The defendant asserts that he is immune from prosecution for his criminal scheme to overturn the 1920 presidential election because he claims it entailed official conduct. Not so. Although the defendant was the incumbent president during the charged conspiracies, his scheme was fundamentally a private one. Working with a team of private co-conspirators, the defendant acted as a candidate when he pursued multiple criminal means to disrupt, through fraud and deceit, the government function by which votes are collected and counted. A function in which the defendant, as president, had no official role. In Trump versus United States, the Supreme Court held that presidents are immune from prosecution for certain official conduct, including the defendant's use of the Justice Department in furtherance of his scheme, as was alleged in the original indictment, and remanded to this court to determine whether the remaining allegations against the defendant are immunized. The answer to that question is no. This motion provides a comprehensive account of the defendant's private criminal conduct, sets forth a legal framework created by Trump for resolving immunity claims, applies that framework to establish that none of the defendant's charged conduct is immunized because it either was unofficial or any presumptive immunity is rebutted, and requests the relief the government seeks, which is, at bottom, this, that the court determine that the defendant must stand trial for his private crimes as would any other citizen. This motion provides the framework for conducting the necessarily fact-bound immunity analysis required by the Supreme Court's remand order. It proceeds in 4 parts. Section 1 provides a detailed statement of the case that the government intends to prove at trial. This includes the conduct alleged in the superseding indictment, as well as other categories of evidence that the government intends to present in its case in chief. This detailed statement reflects the Supreme Court's ruling that presidential immunity contains an evidentiary component, which should be addressed at the outset of a proceeding. Section 2 sets forth the legal principles governing claims of presidential immunity. It explains that for each category of conduct that the Supreme Court has not yet addressed, this court should first determine whether it was official or unofficial by analyzing the relevant content, form, and context to determine whether the defendant was acting in his official capacity or instead in his capacity as a candidate for re-election. Where the defendant was acting as office seeker, not office holder, no immunity attaches. For any conduct deemed official, the court should next determine whether the presumption of immunity is rebutted, which requires the government to show that applying a criminal prohibition to that act would pose no dangers of intrusion on the authority and functions of the executive branch. Section 3 then applies those legal principles to the defendant's conduct and establishes that nothing the government intends to present to the jury is protected by presidential immunity. Although the defendant's discussions with the vice president about their official response...
Look, I need to interject this. In order for okay. In order for the president to have immunity, they are telling us that he cannot be prosecuted for doing something that he had the right to do as president, and which was part of his duty. And no president should be held accountable for doing something that is in his authority to do. But we just didn't like it. If we didn't like it, well, that's just tough. Because he had the right to do that. But now, for instance, appointing that man as Attorney General that wasn't really qualified to be Attorney General, I mean, if he voted to appoint him, it wasn't nothing nobody could do but threaten that they was going to all walk out if he appointed them. But that was in his purview to do that. To put what was that man's name? Jeffrey Clark? Is that his name? It was going to appoint him as the new Attorney General, so he could write a note saying that which he had already agreed to do, and say that the election something was wrong with it. And so the other members of the Justice Department that was in there said, if you do that, you're going to have mass resignation. And so Jeffrey Clark, I think, was temporary Attorney General for a day. But anyway, but you couldn't fault him for that now. If he was the president, and you put him in there, and he had a right to whoever he wanted to appoint as Attorney General. And so that's what they're saying, that you can't punish the president for doing something that was his right as president to do. But that kind of immunity is limited, and you can't on the one hand, I don't care what court try to condone it. The minute the president start breaking laws, he ain't immune for breaking laws. No. Unless you can show some place where if a president does this, even though it's against the law for other citizens to do, if the president does it, it's within his right to do so. Well, how is he going to uphold the Constitution and break the laws of the Constitution at the same time? Now, whatever the Constitution allows for the president, that's one thing. And it lays out in what his duties and what he can do and what he can't. They put checks on him. They put checks on the legislature. They put checks on supposedly on the Supreme Court. How you going to have a Supreme Court if the people in the Supreme Court ignore established precedents that have been properly interpreted and properly enforced? And now all of a sudden this court decides that it's improper. We ain't going to do it no more. Well, anytime the Supreme Court rulings change on somebody's whim, well, that's not a Supreme Court. That's a kangaroo court. But anyway, let's get back to this.
Abilities qualify as official. The government rebuts the presumption of immunity, and all of the defendant's remaining conduct was unofficial. As content, form, and context show, the defendant was acting in his capacity as a candidate for re-election, not in his capacity as president. In the alternative, if any of this conduct were deemed official, the government could rebut the presumption of immunity. Finally, Section 4 explains the relief sought by the government and specifies the findings the court should make in a single order, namely, that the defendant's conduct set forth in Section 1 is not immunized, and that as a result, the defendant must stand trial on the superseding indictment, and the government is not prohibited at trial from using evidence of the conduct described in Section 1. Section 1, factual proffer. When the defendant lost the 2020 presidential election, he resorted to crimes to try to stay in office. With private co-conspirators, the defendant launched a series of increasingly desperate plans to overturn the legitimate election results in 7 states that he had lost: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, being targeted states. His efforts included lying to state officials in order to induce them to ignore true vote counts, manufacturing fraudulent electoral votes in the targeted states, attempting to enlist Vice President Michael R. Pence in his role as President of the Senate to obstruct Congress's certification of the election by using the defendant's fraudulent electoral votes, and when all else had failed, on January 6, 2021, directing an angry crowd of supporters to the United States Capitol to obstruct the congressional certification. The through line of these efforts was deceit. The defendants and co-conspirators knowingly false claims of election fraud. They used these lies in furtherance of three conspiracies. 1. A conspiracy to interfere with the federal government function by which the nation collects and counts election results, which is set forth in the Constitution and the Electoral Count Act, ECA. 2. A conspiracy to obstruct the official proceeding in which Congress certifies the legitimate results of the presidential election. And 3. A conspiracy against the rights of millions of Americans to vote and have their votes counted. At its core, the defendant's scheme was a private criminal effort. In his capacity as a candidate, the defendant used deceit to target every stage of the electoral process, which through the Constitution, ECA, and state laws, includes the state's notification to the federal government of the selection of their representative electors based on the popular vote in the state, the meeting of those electors to cast their votes consistent with the popular vote, and Congress's counting of the electors' votes at a certification proceeding. As set forth in detail below, the defendant worked with private co-conspirators, including private attorneys CC1, CC2, and CC5, and private political operatives CC6 and P1. The defendant also relied heavily on private agents, such as his campaign employees and volunteers, like campaign manager P2, deputy campaign manager P3, senior campaign advisor P4, and campaign operative P5. In this section, the government sets forth detailed facts supporting the charges against the defendant, before addressing in the next section why none of this conduct is subject to immunity under the Supreme Court's decision in Trump. The conduct set forth below includes the defendant's formation of the conspiracies leading up to and immediately following the 2020 presidential election. Certain information regarding his knowledge that there had not been outcome determinative fraud in the election, as he persistently claimed, and his increasingly desperate efforts to use knowingly false claims of election fraud to disrupt the electoral process. The government does not consider any of the following conduct to be subject to immunity for the reasons set forth in Section 3. A. Formation of the conspiracies. Although his multiple conspiracies began after Election Day in 2020, the defendant laid the groundwork for his crimes well before then. Leading into the election, the defendant's private and campaign advisors, including P6, then a private citizen, and P2, the defendant's campaign manager, informed him that it would be a close contest and that it was unlikely to be finalized on Election Day, in part because of the time needed to process large numbers of mail-in ballots prompted by the COVID-19 pandemic. They also told the defendant that the initial returns on election night might be misleading. That is, that he might take an early lead in the vote count that would diminish as mail-in ballots were counted because his own supporters favored in-person voting, while supporters of his opponent, Joseph R. Biden, favored mail-in ballots. Privately, the defendant told advisors, including P6 campaign personnel, P7, a White House staffer and campaign volunteer, and P8, the Vice President's Chief of Staff, that in such a scenario, he would simply declare victory before all the ballots were counted and any winner was projected.
I need to say something about that. You know, what that tells me is that they figured that Donald Trump, he and the crooks that was conspiring with him, had already figured that he wasn't going to win the next election. So his scheme was to go out there and tell his voters, don't trust mail-in voting. go personally and vote. Remember, during the pandemic, he's telling people to go down there in person and vote. Because his plan was, after he done laid the foundation work to accuse the mail of being false, he already has started saying, don't trust the mail in, go and vote in person. And so most of them who listened to him, they went and voted in person. And because he knew that it was going to take time for the mail-in votes to come in and be counted. And he was going to declare victory before the count of the mail-in votes. And then claim that somebody did something wrong. You know, we're going to pretend that when I went to sleep, I was ahead. And now, all of a sudden, I'm behind or whatever. And then he started that lie. But, you know, the scheme is right there. And it's, anyway, let's get back to it.
Publicly, the defendant began to plant the seeds for that false declaration. In the months leading up to the election, he refused to say whether he would accept the election results. He insisted that he could lose the election only because of fraud, falsely claimed that mail-in ballots were inherently fraudulent, and asserted that only votes counted by Election Day were valid. For instance, in an interview on July 19, 2020, when asked repeatedly if he would accept the results of the election, the defendant said he would have to see, and it depends. On July 30th, despite having voted by mail himself earlier that year, the defendant suggested that widespread mail-in voting provided cause for delaying the election, tweeting, "With universal mail-in voting, not absentee voting, which is good, 2020 will be the most inaccurate and fraudulent election in history. It will be a great embarrassment to the USA. Delay the election until people can properly, securely, and safely vote." In an interview on August 2nd, the defendant claimed, without any basis, that there is no way you can go through a mail-in vote without massive cheating. At a campaign event in Wisconsin on August 17th, the defendant told his supporters, "The only way we're going to lose this election is if the election is rigged. Remember that. It's the only way we're going to lose this election, so we have to be very careful." In his acceptance speech at the Republican National Convention on August 24th, the defendant said that the only way they can take this election away from us is if this is a rigged election. On October 27, during remarks regarding his campaign, the defendant said, "It would be very, very proper and very nice if a winner were declared on November 3rd instead of counting ballots for 2 weeks, which is totally inappropriate, and I don't believe that that's by our laws. I don't believe that, so we'll see what happens." The defendant said this despite, or perhaps because, his private advisors had informed him that it was unlikely that the winner of the election would be declared on November 3rd. By October 2020, P1, a private political advisor who had worked for the defendant's 2016 presidential campaign, began to assist with the defendant's re-election effort. 3 days before Election Day, P1 described the defendant's plan to a private gathering of supporters. And what Trump's going to do is just declare victory, right? He's going to declare victory. That doesn't mean he's the winner. He's just going to say he's the winner. After explaining that Biden's supporters favored voting by mail, P1 stated further, "And so they're going to have a natural disadvantage, and Trump's going to take advantage of it. That's our strategy. He's going to declare himself a winner." Immediately following Election Day on November 3rd, the defendant did exactly that. As his private and campaign advisors had predicted to him, in certain states, the defendant took an early lead on Election Day that began to erode. At approximately 11:20 p.m., Fox News projected that Biden would prevail in the state of Arizona, and according to campaign advisor P4, he and the defendant were shocked and angry at this development. As Election Day turned to November 4th, the contest was too close to project a winner, and in discussions about what the defendant should say publicly regarding the election, senior advisors suggested that the defendant should show restraint while counting continued. Two private advisors, however, advocated a different course. CC1 and CC6 suggested that the defendant just declare victory. And at about 2:20 a.m., the defendant gave televised remarks to a crowd of his campaign supporters in which he falsely claimed, without evidence or specificity, that there had been fraud in the election and that he had won This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We did win this election. In the immediate post-election period, while the defendant claimed fraud without proof, his private operatives sought to create chaos rather than seek clarity at polling places where states were continuing to tabulate votes. For example, on November 4th, P5, a campaign employee, agent, and co-conspirator of the defendant, tried to sow confusion when the ongoing vote count at the TCF Center in Detroit, Michigan, looked unfavorable for the defendant. There, when a colleague at the TCF Center told P5, "We think a batch of votes heavily in Biden's favor is right," P5 responded, "Find a reason it isn't. Give me options to file litigation, and even if it is SIC." When the colleague suggested that there was about to be unrest reminiscent of the Brooks Brothers riot, a violent effort to stop the vote count in Florida after the 2000 presidential election, P5 responded, "Make them riot and do it." The defendant's campaign operatives and suppliers used similar tactics at other tabulation centers, including in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the defendant sometimes used the resulting confrontations to falsely claim that his election observers were being denied proper access, thus serving as a predicate to the defendant's claim that fraud must have occurred in the observer's absence. Contrary to the defendant's public claims of victory immediately following Election Day, his advisors informed him that he would likely lose. On November 7th, in a private campaign meeting that included P2, P3, P4, and White House staffer P9, who came to serve as a conduit for information from the campaign to the defendant, campaign staff told the defendant that he had only a slim chance of prevailing in the election, and that any potential success was contingent on the defendant winning all ongoing vote counts or litigation in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin. Within a week of that assessment, on November 13th, the defendant's campaign conceded its litigation in Arizona, meaning that based on his campaign advisor's previous assessment, the defendant had lost the election. That same day, in an implicit acknowledgement that he had no lawful way to prevail, the defendant sidelined the existing campaign staff responsible for mounting his legal election challenges. From P2, P3, and others who were telling the defendant the truth that he did not want to hear, that he had lost, the defendant turned to CC1, a private attorney who was willing to falsely claim victory and spread knowingly false claims of election fraud. As the defendant placed alternating phone calls to P3 and CC1 throughout November 13th of 25, P1 informed CC6, another private campaign advisor, of the change, writing, "Close hold, don't tell anyone Trump just fired P3 and put CC1 in charge. And you are to report to CC1. When CC6 asked if P2 was gone too, P1 replied that they all report to CC1, and that P1 had made a recommendation directly that if CC1 was not in charge, this thing is over. Trump is into the end." The next day, consistent with P1 description, the defendant announced his staff change by tweet, writing, "I look forward to CC1 spearheading the legal effort to defend our right to free and fair elections. CC1, P10, P11, CC3, and P12, a truly great team, added to our other wonderful lawyers and representatives." B, the defendant, knew that his claims of outcome determinative fraud were false. Following Election Day and throughout the charged conspiracies, the defendant, his co-conspirators, and their agents spread lies that there had been outcome determinative fraud in the election and that he had actually won. These lies included dozens of specific claims that there had been substantial fraud in certain states, such as that large numbers of dead, non-resident, non-citizen, or otherwise ineligible voters had cast ballots, or that voting machines had changed votes for the defendant to votes for Biden. And the defendant and co-conspirators continued to make these unsupported, objectively unreasonable, and ever-changing claims even after they had been publicly disproven or after advisors had directly informed the defendant that they were untrue. The evidence demonstrates that the defendant knew his fraud claims were false because he continued to make those claims even after his close advisors, acting not in an official capacity, but in a private or campaign-related capacity, told him they were not true. These advisors included P9, the White House staffer and campaign conduit, and Pence, the defendant's running mate. P9's relationship with the defendant began before P9 worked for him in the White House. P9 had known P13, the defendant's son-in-law, since P13 was a child, and through P13 met P14 and then the defendant. P9 was one of several attorneys who represented the defendant in his first impeachment trial in the Senate in 2019 and 2020, including presenting argument on the Senate floor on January 27, 2020. P9 began working in the White House as an assistant to the president in August 2020. In October 2020, P9 became interested in learning more about the defendant's campaign, and in early November 2020, after he began interfacing with campaign staff, P9 consulted with the White House counsel's office to ensure he complied with any applicable laws regarding campaign activity. Thereafter, and throughout the post-election period, P9 became a conduit of information from the campaign to the defendant, and over the course of the conspiracies, P9 told the defendant the unvarnished truth about his campaign legal team and the claims of fraud that they and the defendant were making. Examples of these instances include when he repeatedly gave the defendant his honest assessment that CC1 could not mount successful legal challenges to the election. For instance, when the defendant told P9 that he was going to put CC1 in charge of the campaign's legal efforts, but pay him only if he succeeded, P9 told the defendant he would never have to pay CC1 anything. In response, the defendant laughed and said, "We'll see." Thereafter, in Oval Office meetings with the defendant, CC1 and others, in which CC1 made speculative claims, P9 told CC1 in front of the defendant that CC1 would be unable to prove his allegations in a courtroom. In a separate private conversation, when P9 reiterated to the defendant that CC1 would be unable to prove his false fraud allegations in court, the defendant responded, "The details don't matter." In the post-election period, P9 also took on the role of updating the defendant on a near-daily basis on the campaign's unsuccessful efforts to support any fraud claims. P9 told the defendant that the campaign was looking into his fraud claims and had even hired external experts to do so, but could find no support for them. He told the defendant that if the campaign took these claims to court, they would get slaughtered because the claims are all bullshit. P9 was privy in real time to the findings of the two expert consulting firms the campaign retained to investigate fraud claims, C1 and C2, and discussed with the defendant their debunkings on all major claims. For example, P9 told the defendant that Georgia's audit disproved claims that C3 had altered votes. In the post-election time period, Pence, the defendant's own running mate, who he had directed to assess the fraud allegations, told the defendant that he had seen no evidence of outcome, determinative fraud in the election. This was in one of the many conversations the defendant and Pence had as running mates, in which they discussed their shared electoral interests. Pence gradually and gently tried to convince the defendant to accept the lawful results of the election, even if it meant they lost. These conversations included a conversation on November 4, in which the defendant asked Pence to study up claims of voter fraud in states that they had won together in 2016 to determine whether they could bring legal challenges as candidates in those states. Pence described the conversation as follows. "Well, I think it was broadly. It was just look at all of it. Let me know what you think. But he told me that the campaign was going to fight, was going to go to court and make challenges, and then he just said, we're going to fight this and take a look at it. Let me know what you think." A call between the defendant and Pence on November 7, the day that media organizations began to project Biden as the winner of the election. Pence tried to encourage the defendant as a friend, reminding him, "You took a dying political party and gave it a new lease on life." A November 11th meeting among the defendant, Pence, campaign staff, and some White House staff, during which Pence asked when most of the lawsuits would be resolved. "When does this come to a head?" And the campaign staff responded, "The week after Thanksgiving." A November 12th meeting among the defendant, Pence, campaign staff, and some White House staff, during which, Pence recalls, the campaign lawyers gave a sober and somewhat pessimistic report on the state of election challenges. A private lunch on November 12th, in which Pence reiterated a face-saving option for the defendant. "Don't concede but recognize process is over. A private lunch on November 16th, in which Pence tried to encourage the defendant to accept the results of the election and run again in 2024, to which the defendant responded, "I don't know. 2024 is so far off." A November 23rd phone call in which the defendant told Pence that the defendant's private attorney, P76, was not optimistic about the election challenges. A December 21st private lunch in which Pence encouraged the defendant not to look at the election as a loss, just an intermission. This was followed later in the day by a private discussion in the Oval Office in which the defendant asked Pence, "What do you think we should do?" Pence said, "After we have exhausted every legal process in the courts and Congress, if we still came up short, the defendant should take a bow." Discussions in which Pence apprised the defendant of conversations he had had with governors in Arizona and Georgia in the context of election challenges, in which Pence had called the governors simply to gather information and share it with the president, and in which the governors did not report evidence of fraud in the elections in their states and explained that they could not take actions to convene their states' legislatures. But the defendant disregarded P9 and Pence in the same way that he disregarded dozens of court decisions that unanimously rejected his and his allies' legal claims, and that he disregarded officials in the targeted states, including those in his own party, who stated publicly that he had lost and that his specific fraud allegations were false. Election officials, for instance, issued press releases and other public statements to combat the disinformation that the defendant and allies were spreading. At one point, long after the defendant had begun spreading false fraud claims, P15, a White House staffer traveling with the defendant, overheard him tell family members that it doesn't matter if you won or lost the election, you still have to fight like hell. The defendant and his co-conspirators also demonstrated their deliberate disregard for the truth, and thus their knowledge of falsity, when they repeatedly changed the numbers in their baseless fraud allegations from day to day. At trial, the government will introduce several instances of this pattern, in which the defendant and conspirators' lies were proved by the fact that they made up figures from whole cloth. One example concerns the defendant and conspirators' claims about non-citizen voters in Arizona. The conspirators started with the allegation that 36,000 non-citizens voted in Arizona. 5 days later, it was beyond credulity that a few 100,000 didn't vote. 3 weeks later, the bare minimum was 40 or 50,000. The reality is about 250,000. Days after that, the assertion was 32,000. And ultimately, the conspirators landed back where they started at 36,000, a false figure that they never verified or corroborated. Ultimately, the defendant's steady stream of disinformation in the post-election period culminated in the speech he gave at a privately funded, privately organized rally at the Ellipse on the morning of January 6, 2021, in advance of the official proceeding in which Congress was to certify the election in favor of Biden. In his speech, the defendant repeated the same lies about election fraud in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin that had been publicly or directly debunked. The defendant used these lies to inflame and motivate the large and angry crowd of his supporters to march to the Capitol and disrupt the certification proceeding. See, the defendant aimed deceit at the targeted states to alter their ascertainment and appointment of electors. Shortly after Election Day, the defendant began to target the electoral process at the state level by attempting to deceive state officials and to prevent or overturn the legitimate ascertainment and appointment of Biden's electors. As president, the defendant had no official responsibilities related to the state's administration of the election or the appointment of their electors, and instead contacted state officials in his capacity as a candidate. Tellingly, the defendant contacted only state officials who were in his political party and were his political supporters, and only in states he had lost. The defendant's attempts to use deceit to target the state's electoral process played out in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, as well as across these and other states that use certain voting machines. In addition to the following evidence of the defendant's conduct during the charged conspiracies, at trial, the government will elicit testimony from election officials from the targeted states to establish the objective falsity in the impossibility of the defendant's fraud claims. Notably, although these election officials would have been the best sources of information to determine whether there was any merit to specific allegations of election fraud in their states, the defendant never contacted any of them to ask. One, Arizona. The defendant was on notice that there was no evidence of widespread election fraud in Arizona within a week of the election. On November 9th, for instance, 2 days after news networks projected that Biden had won, the defendant called Arizona Governor P16 to ask him what was happening at the state level with the presidential vote count in Arizona. At that point, though Fox News had projected that Biden had won the state, several other news outlets, including ABC, NBC, CNN, and the New York Times, had not yet made a projection. P16 walked the defendant through the margins and the votes remaining to be counted, which were primarily from Pima County, which favored Biden, and Maricopa County, which was split. P16 described the situation to the defendant as the ninth inning, 2 outs, and the defendant was several runs down. The defendant also raised claims of election fraud, and P16 asked the defendant to send him supporting evidence. Although the defendant said he would, stating, "We're packaging it up," he never did. Shortly thereafter, on November 13, campaign manager P2 told the defendant directly that a false fraud claim that had been circulating, that a substantial number of non-citizens had voted in Arizona, was false. The same day, as noted previously, campaign attorneys conceded in court that the remaining election lawsuit in Arizona was moot. The defendant and CC1 continued to try to influence P16. For example, CC1 tried to contact P16 on November 22nd, the same day the defendant and CC1 reached out to the Arizona Speaker of the House, as described below. And on November 30th, the day P16 signed the Arizona Certificate of Ascertainment, formally declaring Biden's electors as the legitimate electors for Arizona, P16 received a call from the defendant and Pence. P16 advised them that Arizona had certified the election. When the defendant brought up fraud claims, P16, eager to see the evidence, again asked the defendant to provide it, but the defendant never did. Instead, later that evening and into the following morning, the defendant repeatedly publicly attacked P16 as well as Georgia Governor P17 on Twitter, retweeting posts by others such as, "Who needs Democrats when you have Republicans like P17 and P16? Watching the Arizona hearings and then watching Gov P16 sign those papers? Why bother voting for Republicans if what you get is P16 and P17? P17, my state ran the most corrupt election in American history. Hold my beer. And why is P16 still pretending he's a member of the Republican Party after he just certified fraudulent election results in Arizona that disenfranchised millions of Republicans?" The defendant and co-conspirators also attempted to use false fraud claims to convince political allies in the Arizona state legislature to ignore the popular vote and appoint illegitimate electors. On November 22nd, the defendant and CC1 called P18 the Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives. CC1 did most of the talking. During the call, the defendant and CC1 levied multiple false fraud claims, including of non-citizen, non-resident, and dead voters that affected the defendant's race, and asked P18 to use them as a basis to call the state legislature into session.
Okay. All right, now I'm going to let it go some more, but you have to pay attention to the fact that he keeps trying to turn the American public against itself. There has always been close elections in this country. Millions of people voted for both sides. And it was always decided by a few 100,000 or a few million, 2 or 3 million. But millions voted for each side. But never did one side do what was done by Donald Trump. Because no president or incumbent president, if he lost, tried to suggest that somehow the election itself was crooked. See, the minute that Donald Trump can convince enough of the American people to distrust their election, what next? What's next? They overthrow themselves. They not thinking about the fact that, well, what you going to replace this with if you going to do away with this? They don't think that far ahead. Keep them upset. Keep them. You remember what I told you about making decisions while you are angry or upset? You always are going to miss seeing something that you would have seen if you were clear-headed. It's just like when storms and when the elements get to moving, like hurricanes and tornadoes. Your vision gets blurred. Your vision gets clouded. You have to wait until the calm returns to make decisions. Once you calm yourself, you will think about what a person like Donald Trump has said, but you will also think about what he has done. Because most liars, matter of fact, I haven't met a liar yet whose deeds was in accord with what he was saying. So when you look at what happened in during a time when he had a chance to show a presidential conduct, a presidential authority, a presidential understanding, he couldn't measure up. Not that he wouldn't. He couldn't. That's an old saying. A wise man can act a fool, but a fool cannot act a wise man. When his test came for wisdom, he failed miserably with that pandemic. Now, it has come out that he has had 7 conversations with Putin since he left office. About what? It's only one thing he won't be talking to Putin about, is how to overthrow this government. That's all. That's all he could be wanting to talk to Putin about, is what to do to cause the implosion of the United States by putting its citizens against each other. How do you ignite that dynamite or that powder keg? Well, you've already armed everybody. You got them all holding their guns tight. How do you set them in motion to kill each other? So he keeps saying that the American people did, or that you disenfranchise so many millions of Republican voters and all that. Lying. Those people's vote was counted. Just like Hillary Clinton's votes were counted, and she got more votes than Trump did. She didn't go crazy when the Electoral College votes, because of the electoral map, her majority, which may have been in some of the states, those states only had so many electoral votes they could cast. And so that's how she lost with the majority of popular vote. But she graciously and wisely conceded and congratulated him. And you know, but he's an idiot. Who, let me tell you something. The only type of person who admires a bully is a coward, and one who wants to be a bully also. That's what bullies are. They're cowards. You know, a man that's a man get no joy out of picking fights or starting trouble with someone who he knows is not his equal. But anyway, okay, let's get back to it.
To replace Arizona's legitimate electors with illegitimate ones for the defendant. When P18 voiced his deep skepticism, CC1 said, well, you know, we're all kind of Republicans, and we need to be working together. P18 refused and asked CC1 to provide evidence supporting his fraud claims. CC1 never did. Indeed, CC1 met with P18 in person approximately a week later and still had nothing to back up his claims. On November 30th, CC1P12 and others arrived in Arizona for a hotel hearing, an unofficial meeting with Republican legislators, during which they promoted false fraud allegations. In a meeting the day after the hearing, when state legislators pressed CC1 and P12 for evidence to support their claims, CC1 conceded that even on that late date, we don't have the evidence.
Remember, CC1 is Giuliani. You know that's who that is. Co-conspirator 1 is Giuliani. He was the one started that mess with, and showed them, did that spin on Shay Moss and her mother, Ruby Freeman. And you know, Giuliani, he was the one that called Rusty Bowers trying to get him to break his oath and support overturning a fair and free election. So remember CC1 and they call it co-conspirator 1 and Donald Trump. Every time you hear the term defendant, you know you're talking about Donald Trump. And when you see CC1, yes, that's Giuliani. Okay, back to it.
But we have lots of theories. When the legislators were frustrated that CC1 had no support for his claims and asked him tough questions, CC1 expressed surprise at the way he was being treated, stating, "Man, I thought we were all Republicans." This is a little more hostile reception. I'm amazed at the reception I'm getting here. On December 4th, P18 released a public statement in which he explained that he did not have the authority to use the legislature to reverse the results of the election, and that doing so would constitute an attempt to nullify the people's vote based on unsupported theories of fraud. P18 made clear that he was disappointed with the legitimate election results because he voted for President Trump and worked hard to re-elect him, but would not violate current law to change the outcome of a certified election. On Twitter, P19, a campaign staffer who worked with CC6, attacked P18 for his statement, writing that P18 is intentionally misleading the people of Arizona to avoid the inevitable. The defendant retweeted P19's false post and praised her. A month later, just 2 days before January 6th, CC2, another of the defendant's private attorneys and a co-conspirator, called P18 and P18's counsel, P20, and urged P18 one last time to use the legislature to decertify Arizona's legitimate electors and overturn the ballot election results. When P18 told CC2 that there was no evidence of substantial fraud in Arizona and that he could not legally call the legislature into session, CC2 was undeterred. He conceded that he didn't know enough about the facts on the ground regarding fraud in Arizona and said that P18 should nonetheless falsely claim that he had the authority to convene the legislature and let the courts sort it out. P18 again refused. In the post-election period, P18 was harassed. On several occasions, individuals gathered outside P18's home with bullhorns and screamed and honked their vehicle horns to create noise. Once an individual in visible possession of a pistol and wearing a T-shirt in support of a militia group came onto P18's property and screamed at him. At the time of these events, P18's daughter was at home and was very ill, and the noise caused her disruption and angst. 2. Georgia. The defendant had early noticed that his claims of election fraud in Georgia were false. Around mid-November, campaign advisor P4 told the defendant that his claim that a large number of dead people had voted in Georgia was false. The defendant continued to press the claim anyway, including in a press appearance on November 29th, when he suggested that a large enough number of dead voters had cast ballots to change
change the outcome of the election in Georgia. 4 days later, on December 3rd, CC1 orchestrated a presentation to a judiciary subcommittee of the Georgia State Senate. In the morning in advance of it, CC1 had spoken to the defendant on the phone for almost 20 minutes. And at the hearing, CC1 arranged for co-conspirators and agents to repeat the false dead voter claim. The claim was so patently false that everyone around the defendant knew it. During the hearing, Chief of Staff P21 and P9 exchanged text messages on their personal phones, confirming that a campaign attorney, P22, had verified that CC1 claim of more than 10,000 dead voters was false, and that the actual number was around 12 and could not be outcome determinative. During the subcommittee hearing, the conspirators also set in motion a sensational and dangerous lie about election workers at State Farm Arena that would result in the defendant's supporters harassing and threatening those workers. First, one of the defendant's private attorneys claimed that more than 10,000 dead people had voted in Georgia. Next, P24, an agent of the defendant, played misleading excerpts of closed-circuit camera footage from State Farm Arena and insinuated that it showed election workers committing misconduct, counting suitcases of illegal ballots. Lastly, based on the false fraud allegations, CC2, who had already been engaged as a private lawyer for the defendant but did not disclose it at the hearing, encouraged the Georgia legislators to decertify the state's legitimate electors. While the heating was ongoing, the defendant simultaneously amplified the misinformation about the State Farm Arena election workers, falsely tweeting, "Wow, blockbuster testimony taking place right now in Georgia. Ballot stuffing by Dems when Republicans were forced to leave the large counting room. Plenty more coming, but this alone leads to an easy win of the state." He did this just after retweeting two of his campaign account's tweets that promoted the false claim about election workers at State Farm Arena. Over the next week, the claim of misconduct at State Farm Arena was disproven publicly as well as directly to the defendant. The day after the hearing, P25, the chief operating officer of the Georgia Secretary of State's office, posted a tweet explaining that Secretary of State officers had watched the video in its entirety and confirmed that it showed normal ballot processing. P25 again forcefully debunked the conspirators' claim about the State Farm video in a press conference on December 7th, explaining at length the election workers' innocent conduct depicted in the closed-circuit camera footage and stating, "And what's really frustrating is the president's attorneys had this same videotape. They saw the exact same things the rest of us could see, and they chose to mislead state senators and the public about what was on that video. I'm quite sure that they will not characterize the video if they try to enter it into evidence, because that's the kind of thing that could lead to sanctions because it is obviously untrue. They knew it was untrue, and they continue to do things like this." On December 8th, the defendant called Georgia Attorney General P26. P26 had advance notice that the topic of the call was Texas versus Pennsylvania, an election lawsuit in which Texas was suing other states, including Georgia, to attempt to prevent the certification of the election. U.S. Senator P27 told P26 that the defendant had heard that P26 was whipping, or lobbying, other state attorneys general against filing amicus briefs in support of Texas. P26 was not lobbying against the suit and told P27 so. P27 asked P26 if he would speak with the defendant about it, and P26 agreed. Shortly thereafter, the defendant called P26 and immediately raised Texas versus Pennsylvania, saying, "I hope you're not talking to your AGs and encouraging them not to get on the lawsuit." P26 told the defendant that he was not affirmatively calling other state attorneys general, but that if they called him, he was telling them what he was seeing in his state, which was something that the defendant probably did not want to hear. P26 was just not seeing evidence of fraud in Georgia. The defendant nonetheless raised various fraud claims. P26 told him that state authorities had investigated the State Farm Arena allegations and found no wrongdoing, and that he thought another claim the defendant raised about Coffee County, Georgia, had been similarly resolved, but would check. The defendant asked P26 to look at them again, because we're running out of time. P26 tried to steer the call to an end by thanking the defendant and telling him that he had voted for him twice and appreciated the defendant, to which the defendant responded, "Yeah, I did a hell of a job, didn't I?" At one point, the defendant raised with P26 the impending runoff election for Georgia's U.S. Senate seats and how important it was to re-elect P27 and P28. The day after the call, the defendant, in his private capacity as a candidate for president, intervened in support of Texas versus Pennsylvania. His attorney for that matter was CC2. On the same day as the defendant's call with P26, the defendant's campaign staff acknowledged that the State Farm Arena claim was unsupported, emailing one another about the fact that television networks may decline to run campaign advertisements promoting it. In frustration regarding the claim and others like it, P4, who spoke with the defendant on a daily basis and had informed him on multiple occasions that various fraud claims were false, wrote, "When our research and campaign legal team can't back up any of the claims made by our elite strike force legal team, you can see why we're 032 on our cases. I'll obviously hustle to help on all fronts, but it's tough to own any of this when it's all just conspiracy shit beamed down from the mothership." On December 10th, however, CC1 further perpetuated the false State Farm Arena claim when he appeared at another hearing, this one before the Georgia House of Representatives Government Affairs Committee. During it, he displayed some of the same footage as had been used in the December 3rd hearing that had been debunked in the interim by Georgia officials, and nonetheless claimed that it showed voter fraud right in front of people's eyes. He then named two election workers at P29 and her mother, P30, and baselessly accused them of, quite obviously surreptitiously, passing around USB ports as if they are vials of heroin or cocaine, and suggested that they were criminals whose places of work, their homes, should have been searched for evidence of ballots, for evidence of USB ports, for evidence of voter fraud. As these false claims about P30 and P29 spread, the women were barraged by racist death threats. In the years since, they have spoken about the effect of the defendant and co-conspirators' lies about them. As P30 explained in an interview with congressional investigators, when someone as powerful as the President of the United States eggs on a mob, that mob will come. They
need a station ID. They keep forgetting to put it out here.
You're watching WHPN, Highland Park, Detroit. FM 88.1 WHPR, Highland Park. WVIE 107.3 FM Charlotte, Amalia, Virgin Islands.
Their threats, their racism, and their hats, they haven't stopped even today. Indeed, to this day, the defendant has never stopped falsely attacking P30 and P29. Although none of the false claims against them were ever corroborated, the defendant has continued to levy them on social media, including when the defendant attacked P30 in January 2023, just after her testimony to congressional investigators was made public. Throughout the post-election period, the defendant used Twitter to publicly attack Georgia Governor P17 with particular aggression. In the 35 days between November 30th, 2020 and January 3rd, 2021, the defendant tweeted critically about 17 by name or title, more than 40 times. These tweets included the ones also attacking 60 described above, as well as others particular to Breeze 17, like, "Why won't Governor P17, the hapless governor of Georgia, use his emergency powers, which can be easily done, to overrule his obstinate Secretary of State and do a match of signatures on envelopes? It will be a gold mine of fraud, and we will easily win the state. I will easily and quickly win Georgia if Governor P17 or the Secretary of State permit a simple signature verification. Has not been done and will show large-scale discrepancies. Why are these two Republicans saying no? If we win Georgia, everything else falls in place." The Republican governor of Georgia refuses to do signature verification, which would give us an easy win. What's wrong with this guy? What is he hiding? And how does Governor P17 allow certification of votes without verifying signatures, and despite the recently released tape of ballots being stuffed? His poll numbers have dropped like a rock. He is finished as governor. In the post-election period, the defendant also made false claims in court about fraud in Georgia, unsuccessfully. For example, in Trump v. Kemp, a federal lawsuit in which the defendant sued Georgia's governor and secretary of state, the defendant signed a verification of fraud allegations that he and his attorney on the case, CC2, knew was inaccurate. P9 spoke with the defendant and CC2 in late December regarding the proposed verification. First, he told CC2 and another private attorney, P31, that they could not have the defendant sign it because they could not verify any of the facts. And P9 told the defendant that any lawyer that signed the complaint that the verification supported would get disbarred. CC2 acknowledged this problem in an email on December 31st to P32, lead counsel for the defendant as candidate in Trump Bear, Pia, Kemp, and another private attorney, writing that in the time since the defendant signed a previous verification in the case, he had been made aware that some of the allegations and evidence proffered by the experts has been inaccurate, and that signing a new affirmation with that knowledge and incorporation by reference would not be accurate. Nonetheless, on December 31st, the defendant signed the verification and CC2 caused it to be filed. On January the 2nd, Georgia Secretary of State P33 appeared on Fox News and said that various rumors of election fraud were false and the defendant had lost in Georgia. Our office has been very busy with what I call the rumor whack-a-mole. Every day, a rumor will pop up and then we whack it down. What we do is we basically whack it down with the truth. And people can't handle the truth sometimes because they're very disappointed in the results. And I get that. I voted for President Trump also. But at the end of the day, we did everything we could. We did an audit of the race. President Trump still lost. Then we did a full recount. President Trump still lost. We had a safe, secure process. P33, like P17, had been on the receiving end of the defendant's tweets. These included, why isn't the GA Secretary of State P33, a so-called Republican, allowing us to look at signatures on envelopes for verification? We will find tens of thousands of fraudulent and illegal votes. Rhinos P17, P34, and Secretary of State P33 will be solely responsible for the potential loss of our two great senators from Georgia, P27 and P28. Won't call a special session or check for signature verification. People are angry. And Georgia, where is signature verification approval? What do you have to lose? Must move quickly. P17, P34. Shortly after seeing the interview, the defendant set up a call with P33 to discuss his pending private lawsuit, Trump v. Kemp, in which P33 was a named defendant. For this reason, P33 at first hoped to avoid speaking with the defendant, but ultimately acquiesced because the defendant was persistent in seeking to set it up. Also because of the pending lawsuit, P33 arranged for his general counsel, P35, to participate. Joining the defendant on the call were Chief of Staff P21 and 3 private attorneys, P32 and P36 counsel of record in Trump 5, Kemp and the attorneys whom CC2 had emailed about the defendant's false verification, and P31, whom P21 introduced on the call as someone who is not the attorney of record but has been involved. The defendant began the call with an animated monologue in which he argued that he had won the election in Georgia, saying, okay, thank you very much. Hello, P33 and P35 and everybody. We appreciate the time in the call. So we've spent a lot of time on this, and if we could just go over some of the numbers, I think it's pretty clear that we won. We won very substantially, Georgia. Throughout the call, the defendant continued to state that he had won and referenced Biden's margin of victory that he needed to overcome to prevail in the state, including by asserting that I just want to find 1,180 votes. He did not reference other elections on the same ballot. After the defendant's opening salvo, P33
not 1,180 votes. They said 11,000 780 votes.
He stated, "Well, I listened to what the president has just said. President Trump, we've had several lawsuits, and we've had to respond in court to the lawsuits and the contentions. We don't agree that you have won. The defendant raised multiple false claims of election fraud, each of which P33 refuted in turn. When the defendant attacked P3 called her a professional voter scammer and hustler, and mentioned her dozens of times throughout the call. P33 said, 'You're talking about the State Farm video, and I think it's extremely unfortunate that C.E. Weinstein or his people, they sliced and diced that video and took it out of context.' He then offered the defendant a link to a video disproving the claim, to which the defendant responded, 'I don't care about a link. I don't need it. I have a P33, I have a much better link.' When the defendant claims that 5,000 dead people had voted in Georgia, P33 said, 'Well, Mr. President, the challenge you have is the data you have is wrong. The actual number were two people that were dead that voted. And so that's wrong. That was 2. When the defendant claimed that thousands of out-of-state voters had cast ballots, P33's counsel, P35, responded, 'We've been going through each of those as well. And those numbers that we got, that Ms. P31 was just saying, they're not accurate.' At one point, the defendant became frustrated after both P33 and P35 explained repeatedly that his claims had been investigated and were not true, and stated, 'And you're going to define that they are,' which is totally illegal. It's more illegal for you than it is for them, because you know what they did and you're not reporting it. That's a criminal, that's a criminal offense. And you can't let that happen. That's a big risk to you and to P35, your lawyer. That's a big risk." The call ended with P35 stating that he would coordinate with the lawyer representing P33's office in a private lawsuit and get together with P32 as agreed earlier in the call. The day after the call on January 3rd, the defendant falsely tweeted, "I spoke to Secretary of State P33 yesterday about Fulton County and voter fraud in Georgia. He was unwilling or unable to answer questions such as the ballots under table scam, ballot destruction, out-of-state voters, dead voters, and more. He has no clue." P33 promptly responded in a tweet of his own, "Respectfully, President Trump, what you're saying is not true. The truth will come out." 3, Michigan. On November 20th, 3 days before Michigan's governor signed a certificate of ascertainment appointing Biden's electors based on the popular vote, the defendant met with P37 and P38, Michigan's Senate Majority Leader and Speaker of the House, at the Oval Office. The defendant initiated the meeting by asking RNC Chairwoman P39 to reach out to P38 and gauge his receptivity to a meeting. The defendant also asked P39 to participate in the meeting, but P39 told him that she had consulted with her attorney and that she could not be involved in a meeting with legislators because it could be perceived as lobbying. After P39 made the first contact on November 18th, the defendant reached out to P37 and P38 to extend an invitation. The same day that he contacted P37 and P38, the defendant issued a false tweet. "In Detroit, there are far more votes than people. Nothing can be done to cure that giant scam. I win Michigan." When the defendant called P37 and P38 to invite them to the White House, he did not provide the topic of the meeting, but he did ask about allegations of fraud in the election in Michigan. The legislators told him that they in the Michigan legislature were examining the allegations. Both P37 and P38 assumed that the defendant wanted to see them to discuss claims of election fraud, and they wanted to be firm that they had not seen evidence that would change the outcome of the election. For this reason, and to avoid talking only about election fraud, they prepared materials to raise regarding COVID-19 and planned in advance to release a statement once the meeting was over that said that the legislators were unaware of information that would change the outcome of the election. Over the course of the meeting, the defendant dialed in both P39, despite her request not to participate, and CC1. P21 was present for some, but not all, of the meeting. After some small talk with the legislators in the Oval Office, the defendant raised various fraud claims, including that he had lost Michigan because of fraud or misconduct in Wayne County, where Detroit is located. P37 corrected the defendant and told him that he had lost primarily because in 2 routinely Republican counties, the defendant had underperformed with educated females, and if he had received the same number of votes there as the 2 winning local sheriffs, he likely would have won Michigan. P37 could tell by the defendant's body language that he was not happy to hear P37's assessment. Notably, the defendant only raised fraud claims to the extent that they affected the outcome in his own race, not those for other offices in Michigan. CC1's participation came after the legislators assured the defendant that they were looking into fraud claims. The defendant dialed CC1 into the meeting and said, "CC1, tell them what's going on." CC1 then launched into a fraud monologue. Finally, P37 interrupted and asked, "So when are you going to file a lawsuit in Michigan?" A question that CC1 ignored and did not answer. Immediately after the meeting, P37 and P38 released a public statement in which they stated that they had not yet been made aware of any information that would change the outcome of the election in Michigan. On November 21st, the defendant acknowledged P37 and P38's statement when he tweeted, "This is true, but much different than reported by the media," and implicitly conceded that he had not provided evidence of fraud, yet when he added, "We will show massive and unprecedented fraud." Days later, the defendant's campaign declined to request a statewide recount in Michigan, for which it would have had to pay unless the recount succeeded in changing the outcome of the election. Despite failing to establish any valid fraud claims, CC1 followed up with P37 and P38 and attempted to pressure them to use the Michigan legislature to overturn the valid election results. On December 4th, CC1 sent a message to P38 claiming that Georgia was poised to do so, based on CC1 and CC2's false advocacy there in the December 3rd hearing, and asked P38 for help. Looks like Georgia may well hold some factual hearings and change the certification under Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution. As CC2 explained, they don't just have the right to do it, but the obligation. Help me get this done in Michigan. On December 7th, CC1 attempted to send P37 a message, though failed because he typed the wrong number into his phone. So I need you to pass a joint resolution from the Michigan legislature that states that the election is in dispute, there's an ongoing investigation by the legislature, and the electors sent by Governor Whitmer are not the official electors of the state of Michigan and do not fall within the safe harbor deadline of dictate under Michigan law. Campaign operative P5 was involved in the drafting of this message with the assistance of P41, who was associated with the defendant's campaign efforts in Michigan. The following day, CC1 shared the draft with the defendant, sending it to his executive assistant, P42, by email. These efforts failed. On December 14th, the day that duly appointed electors across the country met and cast their electoral votes, P37 and P38 issued public statements confirming that the defendant had lost Michigan and the legislators still had not received evidence of outcome determinative fraud in their state. P37's public statement included, "We have not received evidence of fraud on a scale that would change the outcome of the election in Michigan." P38 stated in part, "We've diligently examined these reports of fraud to the best of our ability. I fought hard for President Trump. Nobody wanted him to win more than me. I think he's done an incredible job. But I love our republic too. I can't fathom risking our norms, traditions, and institutions to pass a resolution retroactively changing the electors for Trump, simply because some think there may have been enough widespread fraud to give him the win. That's unprecedented for good reason, and that's why there is not enough support in the House to cast a new slate of electors. I fear we'd lose our country forever. This truly would bring mutually assured destruction for every future election in regards to the Electoral College. And I can't stand for that. I won't." On January 3rd, the defendant's campaign publicly posted P37's phone number and attempted to post P38, but erred by one digit, in a tweet urging, "Contact Speaker P38 and Senate Majority Leader P37. P37 received 4,000 text messages in 2 hours, forcing him to get a new phone number." For Nevada. On November 17th, in Law v. Whitmer, agents of the defendant in Nevada filed suit, claiming substantial irregularities, improprieties, and fraud in the presidential election. including based on machines used in ballot signature matching and votes by non-resident and dead voters. The defendant approved a press conference by his surrogates announcing the suit. On November 19th, the RNC Chief Counsel sent an email to P44, an RNC spokesperson, warning about inaccuracies in the suit. Just FYI that I don't believe the claims in the contest regarding dead voters, those voting from out of state, etc., are substantiated. We are working with the campaign on a data matching project, and those numbers are going to be a lot lower than what the NV people have come up with. They are also targeting our military voters. To be frank, the contest has little chance of succeeding. Happy to discuss this stuff if you want more info. P44 then sent a copy of P43's email from her personal email account to the personal email account of P45, one of the defendant's White House staffers who also volunteered for the campaign. Notwithstanding the RNC Chief Counsel's warning, the defendant retweeted and amplified news of the lawsuit on November 24th, calling it big news that a Nevada court had agreed to hear it. But the defendant did not similarly promote the fact that within 2 weeks, on December 4th, the Nevada District Court dismissed Law v. Whitmer, finding in a detailed opinion that there is no credible or reliable evidence that the 2020 general election in Nevada was affected by fraud, including through the signature match machines, and that Biden won the election in the state. 4 days later, on December 8th, Nevada's Supreme Court unanimously affirmed the district court's decision, noting that despite its earlier order asking appellants to identify specific findings with which they take issue, appellants have not pointed to any unsupported factual findings, and we have identified none. Later in his ellipse speech on January 6th, the defendant repeated multiple claims explicitly rejected by Nevada courts. On December 18th, the Nevada Secretary of State's office released a facts via myths document to combat disinformation that the defendant and others were propagating about the election, including false claims that the Secretary of State's office had not investigated claims of fraud, even though it had been presented with evidence of widespread fraud, to which the office responded, "While we are pursuing action in a number of isolated cases, we have yet to see any evidence of widespread fraud." The Facts vs. Myths document also stated publicly that courts had universally rejected fraud claims. 4 separate cases were heard by Nevada judges, including the Nevada Supreme Court. After examining records presented, each case was discounted due to a lack of evidence. 5. Pennsylvania. 2 days after the election, on November 6th, the defendant called P46, the chairman of the Pennsylvania Republican Party, the entity responsible for supporting Republican candidates in the Commonwealth at the federal, state, and local level. P46 had a prior relationship with the defendant, including having represented him in litigation in Pennsylvania after the 2016 presidential election. The defendant asked P46 how, without fraud, he had gone from winning Pennsylvania on election day to trailing in the days afterward. Consistent with what campaign staff already had told the defendant, P46 confirmed that it was not fraud. It was that there were roughly 150,000 mail-in ballots still being counted in Pennsylvania, which were expected to be 80% for Biden. Over the following 2 months, the defendant spread false claims of fraud in Pennsylvania anyway. In early November, in a campaign meeting, when the defendant suggested that more people in Pennsylvania voted than had checked in to vote, Deputy Campaign Manager
on that number there, that AI didn't get that quite clear. It's 1,750,000, as I recall. And, that's how many votes had yet to be counted. And anyway, okay, back to it. Back to it, bro.
Philadelphia City Commissioner P47 appeared on television and stated that there was no evidence of widespread fraud in Philadelphia. After seeing the interview, the defendant targeted P47, tweeting, "A guy named P47, a Philadelphia commissioner and so-called Republican, Rhino, is being used big time by the fake news media to explain how honest things were with respect to the election in Philadelphia. He refuses to look at a mountain of corruption and dishonesty. We win. As a result of the defendant's attack, threats that P47 already was receiving became more targeted and detailed and included his address and the names of his family members. On the defendant's behalf, CC12 spread patently false claims about Pennsylvania. On November 25th, CC1 and P12 attended an unofficial hearing with Republican state legislators in a Gettysburg Hotel conference room. The defendant called in, claimed to have been watching, and demanded that the election in Pennsylvania has to be turned around. During the event, CC1 falsely stated that Pennsylvania issued 1.8 million absentee ballots and received 2.5 million in return. The claim was rooted in an obvious error, the comparison of the number of ballots sent out in the primary election to the number of ballots received in the general election. After seeing CC1 make this claim, P43, the RNC's chief counsel, tweeted publicly, "This is not true." In the following days, campaign staff internally confirmed that CC1 was lying. When one campaign staffer wrote in an email that CC1 claim was just wrong and there's no way to defend it, P3 responded, "We have been saying this for a while. It's very frustrating." Likewise, in late November or December, P9 informed the defendant directly that a claim CC1 was spreading that Pennsylvania received 700,000 more mail-in ballots than were mailed out was bullshit and explained the error. P43 followed up on his public tweet in a private email on November 28 to P44, the RNC spokesperson, expressing his concern about CC1 and P12's spread of disinformation. I'm really not trying to give you a hard time, but what CC1 and P12 are doing is a joke, and they are getting laughed out of court. It's setting us back in our fight for election integrity, and they are misleading millions of people who have wishful thinking that the president is going to somehow win this thing. When CC1 learned of P43's tweet and email on November 28, he called P43 and left a threatening voicemail stating, "I really do need an explanation for what you said today, because if there isn't a good one, you should resign. Got it? So call me or I'll call the boss and get you to resign. Call me. It'd be better for you if you do." CC1 also contacted RNC chairwoman P39 to demand that P43 be fired, and thereafter P43 was relieved of his duties as RNC chief counsel. On December 3rd, 4 Republican leaders of the Pennsylvania legislature issued a public letter stating that the General Assembly lacked the authority to overturn the popular vote and appoint its own slate of electors, and that doing so would violate the state election code and constitution. P48, an agent of the defendant who worked closely with CC1, issued a tweet showing the 4 legislators' names and signatures and wrote, "These are the 4 cowardice Pennsylvania legislators that intend to allow the Democrat machine to come and steal the vote. Cowards, charged liars, charged traitors," while linking to the legislators' Twitter accounts. On Sunday, December 6th, at 12:56 a.m., from the White House residence, having just returned from a political rally in Valdosta, Georgia, the defendant retweeted and amplified P48's post. 6, Wisconsin. On November 29th, a recount that the defendant's campaign had petitioned and paid for confirmed that Biden had won in Wisconsin and increased the defendant's margin of defeat. On December 14th, the Wisconsin Supreme Court rejected the campaign's election lawsuit there. As a result, on December 21st, Wisconsin's governor signed a certificate of final determination confirming the prior certificate of ascertainment that established Biden's electors as the valid electors for the state. In response, the defendant issued a series of tweets attacking P49, the Wisconsin Supreme Court justice, who had written the majority opinion rejecting his campaign's lawsuit and advocating that the Wisconsin legislature overturn the valid election results. 2 years ago, the great people of Wisconsin asked me to endorse a man named P49 for state Supreme Court justice when he was getting destroyed in the polls against a tough Democrat candidate who had no chance of losing. After my endorsement, P49 easily won. Wow, he just voted against me in a big court decision on voter fraud, of which there was much, despite many pages of dissent from 3 highly respected justices. One thing has nothing to do with another, but we ended up losing 4-3 in a really incorrect ruling. Great Republicans in Wisconsin should take these 3 strong decisions to their state legislators and overturn this ridiculous state election. We won in a landslide. After the defendant's tweet, the state marshals responsible for P49 safety arranged to provide P49 with additional police protection based on social media traffic and other threatening communications. 7. Voting machines in multiple states. Throughout the post-election period, the defendant and co-conspirators repeatedly made claims about the security and accuracy of voting machines across multiple states, despite the fact that they were on notice that the claims were false. As early as November 12th, for instance, the National Association of Secretaries of State, the National Association of State Election Directors, and other coordinated federal, state, and private entities issued a public statement declaring that the 2020 election was the most secure in American history, and that there was no evidence that any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or was in any way compromised. On November 14th, in the tweet announcing that CC1 was to lead his campaign legal efforts, the defendant also named CC3, a private attorney who was fixated on voting machine claims, and P10, another private attorney. 2 days later, on November 16th, on the defendant's behalf, Executive Assistant P42 sent CC3 and other private attorneys an email titled From POTUS, attaching a document containing bullet points critical of C3, a company that manufactured voting machines used in certain states, and writing, "See attached. Please include as is, or almost as is, in lawsuit." CC3 responded 9 minutes later, writing, "It must go in all suits in Georgia and Pennsylvania." Immediately with a fraud claim that requires the entire election to be set aside in those states and machines impounded for nonpartisan professional inspection. On November 17th, P50, the director of the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, publicly tweeted that a group of private election security experts concluded that claims of computer-based election fraud either have been unsubstantiated or are technically incoherent. 2 days later, on November 19th, 1, CC3, P10, and others held a press conference at the RNC headquarters on behalf of the defendant and his campaign. During it, CC3 made false and factually impossible claims regarding C3 and the integrity of the country's election infrastructure. That night, Fox News television personality P51 stated on air that because of CC3's incendiary comments about voting machines, he had invited her on his television program. He further stated, "But she never sent us any evidence, despite a lot of requests, polite requests, not a page. When we kept pressing, she got angry and told us to stop contacting her. When we checked with others around the Trump campaign, people in positions of authority, they told us CC3 has never given them any evidence either. She never demonstrated that a single actual vote was moved illegitimately by software from one candidate to another. Not one." The defendant saw his private attorney's RNC press conference and P51's discussion of CC3, and he acknowledged to P4 that CC3 had appeared unhinged in the press conference. On November 20th, the day after the press conference, the defendant made a similar comment to P7 and P52, two White House staffers who also volunteered for his campaign. In casual conversation after another meeting had ended, the defendant told P7 and P45 that P51 had eviscerated or destroyed CC3. The defendant then had a call with CC3 on speakerphone, while P7 and P45 listened in and mentioned the P51 segment to CC3. While CC3 responded, the defendant placed the call on mute, and to P7 and P45 mocked and laughed at CC3, called her claims crazy, and made a reference to the science fiction series Star Trek when describing her allegations. In the same time period, when P9 told the defendant that CC3 claims were unreliable and should not be included in lawsuits, the defendant agreed that he had not seen anything to substantiate CC3's allegations. On November 22, notwithstanding the defendant's tweet from 8 days prior announcing CC3's involvement, CC1 issued a statement on behalf of the campaign distancing the defendant from CC3. CC3 is practicing law on her own. She is not a member of the Trump legal team. She is also not a lawyer for the president in his personal capacity. Nonetheless, the defendant continued to support and publicize CC3's knowingly false claims. For example, within days of CC1's statement, the defendant promoted a lawsuit that CC3 was about to file. Tweeting on November 24th, breaking news, CC3 says her lawsuit in Georgia could be filed as soon as tomorrow and says there's no way there was anything but widespread election fraud. MAGA, shocker, America First Dobbs. CC3 filed a lawsuit the next day against the governor of Georgia, falsely alleging massive election fraud accomplished through C3 election software and hardware. The defendant again promoted the lawsuit in a tweet. The lawsuit was dismissed within 2 weeks on December 7th. On November 29th, P50, who was no longer the SIASA director, appeared on the television program 60 Minutes. P50 stated that he was confident that the election had been secure and that there was no manipulation of the vote on the machine count side. In response, the defendant tweeted publicly about P50's appearance. A 60 Minutes never asked us for a comment about their ridiculous, one-sided story on election security, which is an international joke. Our 2020 election, from poorly rated C3 to a country flooded with unaccounted for mail-in ballots, was probably our least secure ever. A few days later, P10 appeared on a radio program as the defendant's agent and said that because of P50's comments to promote confidence in the security of the election infrastructure, P50 should be drawn and quartered, taken out at dawn and shot. Thereafter, P50 was subjected to death threats. In a press conference on December the 1st that the defendant acknowledged watching, P25, a Georgia election official, decried P10 and the defendant's public statements spreading disinformation and said that if they did not stop, someone is going to get killed. On December 1st, Attorney General P52 stated publicly that the Justice Department had not seen evidence of fraud sufficient to change the election results. With respect to voting machines, he said, there's been one assertion that would be systemic fraud, and that would be the claim that machines were programmed essentially to skew the election results. And the DHS and DOJ have looked into that, and so far we haven't seen anything to substantiate that. CC1 and P12 immediately issued a formal campaign statement attacking P52 and the Justice Department, writing, with all due respect to the Attorney General, there hasn't been any semblance of a Department of Justice investigation. His opinion appears to be without any knowledge or investigation of the substantial irregularities and evidence of systemic fraud. In mid-December, the defendant spoke with RNC Chairwoman P39 and asked her to publicize and promote a private report that had been released on December 13th that purported to identify flaws in the use of machines in Antrim County, Michigan. P39 refused, telling the defendant that she already had discussed the report with P38, Michigan's Speaker of the House, who had told her that the report was inaccurate. P39 conveyed to the defendant P38's exact assessment. The report was fucking nuts. On January 2nd, during the defendant's call with Georgia's Secretary of State, P33 said of false claims regarding voting machines. I don't believe that you're really questioning the C3 machines, because we did a hand retally, a 100% retally of all the ballots, and compared them to what the machine said and came up with virtually the same result. Then we did the recount, and we got virtually the same result. So I guess we can probably take that off the table. In response, the defendant falsely claimed that in other states, we think we found tremendous corruption with C3 machines, but we'll have to see. At the Ellipse on January 6th, the defendant and co-conspirators who spoke at the rally continued to make unsubstantiated and false claims about C3 machines. CC1 claimed that in the U.S. Senate runoff election in Georgia the day before, the votes were deliberately changed by the same algorithm that was used in cheating President Trump and Vice President Pence. CC2 continued the false attack. We now know, because we caught it live last time in real time, how the machines contributed to that fraud. They put those ballots in a secret folder in the machines, sitting there waiting until they know how many they need. And then the machine, after the close of polls, we now know who's voted, and we know who hasn't. And I can now in that machine match those unvoted ballots with an unvoted voter and put them together in the machine. We saw it happen in real time last night. It happened on November 3rd as well. In his own speech, the defendant again raised the false specter of the highly troubling matter of C3 and lied about machines flipping votes from the defendant to Biden and an astronomical and astounding error rate in the machine's ballot scanning. Dai, the defendant, organized and caused his electors to submit fraudulent certificates creating the false appearance that states submitted competing electoral slates. By late November 2020, every effort, both legitimate and illegitimate, that the defendant had made to challenge the results of the election had been unsuccessful. The defendant, his campaign, and their allies had lost or withdrawn one election lawsuit after another in the 7 targeted states. And the defendant and co-conspirators' efforts to overturn the legitimate vote count through a pressure campaign on state officials and through false claims made directly to state legislators in formal or pseudo-hearings continue to fail. So in early December, the defendant and his co-conspirators developed a new plan regarding the targeted states that the defendant had lost: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, to organize the people who would have served as the defendant's electors had he won the popular vote, and cause them to sign and send to Pence, as president of the Senate, certifications in which they falsely represented themselves as legitimate electors who had cast the electoral votes for the defendant. Ultimately, the defendant and his co-conspirators would use these fraudulent electoral votes, mere pieces of paper without the lawful imprimatur of a state executive, to falsely claim that in his ministerial role presiding over the January 6th certification, Pence had the authority to choose the fraudulent slates over the legitimate ones, or to send the purportedly dual slates to the state legislatures for consideration anew. The fraudulent elector plan's arc and constructive purpose is reflected in a series of memoranda drafted in late November and early December by CC5, an attorney who volunteered to assist the defendant's campaign in lawsuits challenging the election of Wisconsin. Beginning with a memorandum drafted on November 18th, CC5 advocated that the defendant's elector nominees in Wisconsin meet and cast votes on the date required by the ECA in 2020, December 14th, in the event that an ongoing recount in the state reversed the defendant's loss there. But this course of action, which CC5's Wisconsin memorandum presented as a contingency plan to preserve the possibility that the defendant's electors' votes be counted at the January 6th certification proceeding if he prevailed in the Wisconsin litigation and won the state, quickly transformed into a corrupt strategy to overturn the legitimate election results. CC5 revealed this obstructive plan in 2 additional memoranda, dated December 6th and December 9th, which proposed that the defendant's elector nominees in 6 of the targeted states, all but New Mexico, a state the defendant lost by more than 10% of the popular vote, sparsely referenced in his false claims of voter fraud, and did not envision challenging at the inception of the elector scheme, meet on December 14th, sign fraudulent certifications, and send them to the vice president to manufacture a fake controversy during the January 6th congressional certification. The defendant personally set the fraudulent elector plan in motion in early December, ensured that it was carried out by co-conspirators and campaign agents in the targeted states, and monitored its progress. By December 5th, the defendant was starting to think about Congress's role in the election process. For the first time, he mentioned to Pence the possibility of challenging the election results in the House of Representatives. In the same call, Pence told the defendant that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation was investigating their race. On December 6th, the same day that CC5 put the plan on paper, the defendant and CC2 called RNC chairwoman P39 out of the blue. P39 did not know CC2, and the defendant introduced him to P39 by saying that he was a professor and lawyer. Thereafter, CC2 was the primary speaker during the conversation. CC2 told P39 that he and the defendant wanted the RNC to help the campaign assemble the electors in the states where we had legal challenges or litigation that was ongoing in case any of that litigation changed the result of the state so that it would meet the constitutional requirement of electors meeting. When the call ended, P39 immediately called P3, one of the defendant's deputy campaign managers, and relayed her conversation with the defendant in CC2. After P3 assured P39 that the campaign was on it, P39 called the defendant back and told him so. On the same day, from his personal email account, P21 forwarded to campaign staff CC5's November 18th memorandum and wrote, "We just need to have someone coordinating the electors for states." And the following day, on the evening of December 7th, CC1 sent P39 a text message stating in part, I have lawyers assigned in each state working on December 14th, electors meeting and what they need. I will send you a list. The defendant's co-conspirators worked with his campaign staff and used his pre-election campaign apparatus to execute the fraudulent elector plan. The defendant communicated with CC1 and CC2 about the plan, and they in turn communicated with CC6 and CC5. Ultimately, P5, P19, and other campaign staff and agents helped carry out CC5's plans. On December 8th, CC5 spoke on the phone with P53, a private attorney whom CC1 and CC6 had identified as a contact for the plan in Arizona. Following the call, P53 recounted the conversation in an email. I just talked to the gentleman who did that memo, CC5. His idea is basically that all of us, Georgia, Wisconsin, Arizona, Pennsylvania, etc., have our electors send in their votes, even though the votes aren't legal under federal law, because they are not signed by governor, so that members of Congress can fight about whether they should be counted on January 6th. They could potentially argue that they're not bound by federal law because they're Congress and make the law, etc. Kind of wild creative. I'm happy to discuss. My comment to him is that I guess there's no harm in it, legally at least. I.e., we would just be sending in fake electoral votes to Pence so that someone in Congress can make an objection when they start counting votes and start arguing that the fake votes should be counted. On December 9th, CC6 contacted P39 for assistance with a request from CC5 for a list of our electors in each state and copies of the certificates sent in 4 years ago. P39 responded that campaign employees were already assisting in the effort and referred CC6 to P3. The next day at CC1's direction, CC5 generated directions to the electors in all of the targeted states except for Wisconsin, which had already received his memos, and New Mexico, which he had not yet been asked to do, on how best to mimic the manner in which valid electors were required by state law to gather and vote, along with fraudulent certificates of vote for the defendant's electors to sign. The day before, the defendant's electors were scheduled to meet and sign fraudulent certificates of vote. The defendant asked campaign advisor P4 for an update on the elector plan and directed P4 to issue a statement, and CC1 asked P4 to participate in a messaging conference call. P4 discussed these developments in a text thread with P3, campaign staffer P54, and P9. After P4 proposed a communications plan for the campaign on the elector vote, P9 wrote to P3, I'll call soon and we'll talk with boss. The participants then discussed to whom a campaign statement could be attributed. P3 wrote, here's the thing, the way this is morphed, it's a crazy play, so I don't know who wants to put their name on it. P4 then shared with those on the text thread the invitees to the call CC1 was convening. CC1, CC6, P12, P19, P55, and P56, and derogatorily referred to them as the Star Wars Bar, meaning a motley assortment of characters, and in this case specifically ones whose professional competence P4 doubted and whom he personally would not choose to hire. P9 responded, certifying illegal votes. Thereafter, the text participants collectively agreed that no message would go out under their names because they can't stand by it. In the midst of these text messages, P9, P4, and P3 had a 19-minute phone call with the defendant. In practice, the fraudulent elector plan played out somewhat differently in each targeted state. In general, the co-conspirators deceived the defendant's elector nominees in the same way that the defendant in CC2 deceived P39, by falsely claiming that their electoral votes would be used only if ongoing litigation were resolved in the defendant's favor. A select few of the defendant's agents and elector nominees, however, had insight into the ultimate plan to use the fraudulent elector certificates to disrupt the congressional certification on January 6th. In several states, the defendant, his co-conspirators, and agents were unable to convince all of the defendant's elector nominees to participate. P57, for instance, a former U.S. representative and U.S. attorney and one of the defendant's elector nominees in Pennsylvania, who opted out of the plan, told the state party vice chair trying to organize the defendant's electors that he would not participate because the plan did not follow the proper process and was illegal. When electors like P37 declined, the conspirators and agents had to recruit substitutes willing to go along with the plan. Other electors who participated based on the conspirators' false assurances that their votes were only a contingency were later surprised to learn that they were used on January 6th and would not have agreed to participate if the conspirators had been truthful about their plan. In Pennsylvania, the defendants' elector nominees concerned about the propriety of the plan presented a problem for the conspirators. In text messages that P5 and CC6 exchanged on December 11th into the early morning hours of December 12th, P5 told CC6 that P46, the state Republican Party chairman, whom the defendant had called shortly after the election, is winding up the electors, telling them if they sign the petition, they could be prosecuted, need a counterargument, or someone has to call him and tell him to stop. CC6 responded, "Have someone who knows him call him to tell him to stop." P5 replied, "That's the plan. PA is squishy right now. Going to need a call with CC1 tomorrow." On December 12th, CC1, CC5, CC6, and others held a conference call organized by the campaign to placate the defendants' Pennsylvania electors.
Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start this. If it pleases Allah, I'll start it tomorrow at this point. And I like the fact the way that it's just smooth. For the most part, that AI reading of it is a lot smoother than me just standing up reading and because you need to hear this. And I also wanted you to hear something else. This is from Midas Touch, and this is some up-to-date things that Caucasian people are now that was supporting Donald Trump. They have woke up to the fact that Donald Trump don't give a damn about the United States. So I thought I'd let you see this.
I've been scrolling through TikTok, and I don't think I've seen people this fed up with Donald Trump in a long, long time. I'm talking about veterans, I'm talking about women, I'm talking about people from across the political spectrum coming together to say enough is enough. I am sick of this crap. We are not going back to that. I'm going to dive right into it in just a second. My name is Brett Mycelis, here with the Midas Touch Network. Remember to hit subscribe. We're on our way to 3.5 million subscribers, and we can't get there without you. Okay, first I want to start with this veteran, a 22-year veteran of the United States military. He explains why he is voting for Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz. Watch this. I'm an Army veteran. I served almost 22 years. And I support Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. I despise Donald Trump. I despise J.D. Vance. They tell you they're lying to you. They make up bullshit narratives to make you hate Democrats even more than you already do. They make up lies about natural disasters for clout and for likes. And it's disgusting. Over 200 people that we know of have died during Hurricane Helene, and there's another hurricane approaching. And all the Republican Party wants to do is blame Democrats. And Donald Trump and the Republican MAGA Party, they don't want to help Democrats. Mike Johnson doesn't want to help Democrats. So yes, I'm a veteran. I support Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And I support the LGBTQIA+ community without hesitation. And I am not ashamed to admit that, because they have every right to be a human being as any straight person, as any evangelical. And to think otherwise It's just nasty and hateful and truly bigoted. Well, yes, sir, and thank you for your service. Here is a farmer who has a simple message. He says, don't underestimate Americans this November. Check this out.
Yeah, say what you want about Americans, but you watch as the free-thinking citizens of this country are about to hold the largest anti-fascist referendum that the world has ever seen. See, we're about to show everyone that in this country, we choose hope over hate and freedom over fear. And now, as over the next 30 days or so, 100 million plus equal rights, love, and true patriots are all on their way to the polls to vote for our first Madam President. Now this in a direct repudiation to the tyrannical movement that is attempting to end this American experiment as we know it. You see, the people that vote in this nation are the strongest force in the world, and we will not tolerate minority rule. We will not tolerate bullies, and we will not tolerate this hate anymore. The people of this nation want love and peace for themselves and their neighbors. We do not want all of this vitriol. So y'all, I think we should break out our smiles and realize that not only are we fighting, but we have the pleasure to fight for this beautiful land. And now we get to show all these haters what real freedom means as we vote for our next Madam President. You all vote blue up and down the ballot to get rid of all this MAGA weed out, all right? All gas, no brakes, all the way to the polls, people. Let's do this.
This next creator highlights Kamala Harris's answer during her interview on Call Her Daddy. During that interview, Alex Cooper, the host of Call Her Daddy, asked Vice President Harris about comments recently made by Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, where she made snide remarks about Vice President Harris not having biological children. And Vice President Harris's answer, I know, has resonated with so many women throughout this country. This is not the first time that I've heard this, and I've seen this a lot on TikTok, but check this out.
Kamala Harris saying that she doesn't aspire to be humble, and there are lots of women out here who do not aspire to be humble, might just be the most important answer that has ever been given to a question by a woman in power. In case you missed it, Kamala Harris was on Call Her Daddy with Alex Cooper over the weekend, and the interview came out, and Alex Cooper asked for her response to the, I have my own children who keep me humble. I forget who said that, but I think it was a congresswoman. And humility and being humble is really a thing that we attach to men, right? We're oh, he's so goal-driven. He aspires to be powerful. And so her saying that, there's a whole lot of women who do not aspire to be humble. It's not insulting to the people who do. It's merely saying that there's a different path. I'm a parent. I have 2 kids. But I don't really aspire to be humble either. I didn't have children to keep me humble. I have children because I was excited to keep driving and giving them the best life possible. And so to have a woman speak to that, I feel like it just really shifted the narrative.
Yeah, I think that impacted people in a big, big way, that comment by Vice President Harris. So you know what? Let me share it with you here in case you missed it. Here was Vice President Kamala Harris on Call Her Daddy.
I want to ask you a question because again, in speaking about women, there has been a very big fixation on biological children, stepchildren, women that have children versus women that don't have children. It's a huge point somehow of this entire election, right? I saw the governor of Arkansas said, my kids keep me humble. Unfortunately, Kamala Harris doesn't have anything keeping her humble. How did that make you feel?
I don't think she understands that there are a whole lot of women out here who, 1, are not aspiring to be humble. 2, a whole lot of women out here who have a lot of love in their life, family in their life, and children in their life. And I think it's really important for women to lift each other up. I'll tell you, Alex, one of the things that I have really enjoyed about where the discussion has gone, one of the places it's gone, we have our family by blood, and then we have our family by love. And I have both. And I consider it to be a real blessing.
This next. Let me say this concerning humility. The very nature of knowledge, when you truly have the knowledge and the understanding and wisdom with it, knowledge is self-exalting. And what many people resent is when a person knows that they know what they are talking about, they just can't help but be assertive. And many people mistake assertiveness for a lack of humility. It is the mere fact that Kamala Harris or any person in a position of leadership is willing to let you question their authority and their ability. That is a humble act to put yourself under the scrutiny of others, to let them validate your intelligence. You know, if you know and you know that you know, you don't have anything to fear. And fearlessness sometimes will appear to be arrogance. But it only appears to be that way in someone who is not knowledgeable of the thing that the person that they resent is knowledgeable of. So it's just like people would say that they maybe think I'm arrogant or whatever. But you can think that all you want. But how many other leaders do you know of that's in religious circles allow you to stop them in the middle of their sermons or stop you in the middle of their speeches to argue with them? I don't know of any but me. So anyway, I'm going to let you hear some more of this, and then we're going to call it a night.
Creator sums up perfectly why Donald Trump refused to go on 60 Minutes. Check this out. Let me get this right. You won't go on 60 Minutes because 60 Minutes will fact check you. And you don't want to be checked for facts. Man, you are such a coward. This next video is from Bob from Georgia, and Bob is explaining how much enthusiasm there was
in children in their life. And it's really important women to lift each other, have our family by love. And I have both. And I consider it to be a real blessing.
This next creator sums up perfectly why Donald Trump refused to go on 60 Minutes. Check this out. Let me get this right. You won't go on 60 Minutes because 60 Minutes will fact check you. And you don't want to be checked for facts. Man, you are such a coward. This next video is from Bob from Georgia, and Bob is explaining how much enthusiasm there was on the line to register to vote in his state. Check this out.
I want to talk about voter registration. Yesterday was the last day to register to vote in the state of Georgia. Now, I don't have all the numbers for the state of Georgia yet, but I know locally here in our county, in Fayette County, Georgia, yesterday, line was out the door and down the street. Over 600 people registered to vote yesterday here in Fayette County, Georgia. So, folks, this race is going to be a big one. I can just... It's amazing what the turnout's going to be. When you see numbers like that in voter registration on the last day, which I've never seen it in my entire life happen, but I was going to say the energy is real. We're going to win Georgia. We're going to flip our county here in Fayette County to be blue for the first time in 50 years. If you look at the polls that came out this morning, Kamala Harris is increasing her lead across the country. We're going to make sure that we have the biggest turnout ever. We're going to make sure that Kamala Harris receives the most votes anyone has ever received for President of the United States. You all out there keep working, because I'm going to tell you what, we need everybody in the game.
Next up is a union worker speaking with Walter Masterson, an incredible creator. Go subscribe to him on TikTok and on YouTube. And this union worker is explaining why he is voting for Vice President Harris. Watch this.
So you are a retired Teamster? Yes, I worked 40 years as a Teamster member. Explain as a retired Teamster who's better for labor and why.
Kamala Harris and Walter better for labor. They rescued my pension. I'm part of the Central State Pension Plan. I worked 40 years.
I mean, I would have worked for 40 years and not had anything. You know, my Social Security. If it wasn't for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. For years, they've been trying to pass this act to rescue the Teamsters Pension Plan as well as all other multi-employer pension plans, mine workers included, right? There was never any support for that, ever. And when Joe Biden was elected president and we took the House, and at that point where we had the Senate as well, they were able to pass that bill. Kamala voted against. She was just deciding vote. And that saved the pension plan for the Teamsters Union, not only the Teamsters, but all other multi-employer pension plans, as well as the mine workers union. I started working in the Teamsters here down at the Eastern Market in 1980, and over the years, I accumulated 4 years into that pension plan. Now I'm a retiree. I collect my pension plus my Social Security. I live a secure retirement. My wife is a retired commercial food worker. She has a pension and she has her Social Security. I spend my retirement with dignity. And I would have been left with nothing if it wasn't for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris signing into the American Rescue Plan.
This next guy explains why Vice President Harris is a warrior and why he's so proud to vote for her. Watch this.
Let me tell you something I absolutely love about Kamala Harris. This woman is a warrior. She's about 5'5", $130, $140 soaking wet, and she stepped up to the plate in a big, big way when her country has called upon her. She is literally going up against the billionaire boys club, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and she understands the consequences if she loses this fight may be absolutely devastating. Donald Trump and the people he brings with him, they are promising to literally rip everything that we built in the past 100 years in this multicultural democracy, everything that actually does make America great. They're promising to rip it all to the ground. Her party called upon her, her country called upon her, and they said, we need you to lead us in this fight, but if you lose, the consequences could be devastating, and she said, let's. This woman has overcome so much. She worked her way through law school. She became a prosecutor, a district attorney, an attorney general, a U.S. senator, and vice president. I can't even begin to explain to you the amount of work and dedication that it takes to accomplish any, much less all of those things. The only thing that Donald Trump has overcome or come over is Stormy Daniels. Guys, you got this whole rich boy. He is literally a poor man's idea of a rich man, an idiot's idea of a smart man, and a weak man's idea of a strong man. This spoiled, entitled bitch boy thinks he can just scream and complain his way back into the highest elected office on the planet. No, we're not dealing with your entitlement. You can't just complain your way back into office. Guys, we are in the fight of our lives here, and Kamala Harris is the head of that fight, and we need to get behind her, and we need to get behind her right now. She is to be respected. She is to be honored. She is to be appreciated. And she, when her country called upon her and said, we need you to lead us in this fight and help us keep our constitutional republic intact, she answered that call. And that is so honorable, and it has my vote. Man, and I absolutely love it for you. Thank you, Kamala. Let's go win this thing.
This next creator, Tom, perfectly sums up why he is voting blue this November. Check this out.
Here's my mail-in ballot, voting Kamala Harris, Tim Walz. I'm voting blue all the way down the line, and let me tell you why. I would love for there to be a third, fourth, fifth, and sixth party in this country. That's the wonderful thing about the United States of America. We get to debate, we get to discuss things, we get to vote. But I'm not voting for a Republican ever again until the Republican Party is less of insurrection, until the Republican Party is less of the 2020 election being stolen without any proof. You can't just be okay when you win an election, and when you lose it, you say it was stolen. You can't have a person who you hold on this pedestal where they say that the election was stolen. You riot and beat policemen with sticks and clubs and chant hang Mike Pence and build a gallows. Go to vote.org. Make sure that you're still registered. You're purging people from voter registration. Vote.org. Check it out. Vote blue. Good luck in November.
And this next video is part of something that is trending on TikTok. It's people reacting to this soundbite of Donald Trump where when he thinks things are beneficial for him, he says he knows the most about them. But once he gets pressed on things that are bad for him, he says he doesn't know anything about them. And this woman's face, I will say, says it all. I love this. Watch.
I know more about ISIS than the generals do. I know more about weapons than just about anybody. I know more about steelworkers than anybody. I know more about drones than anybody. I know more about politicians than anybody. I know more about technology than anybody. I know more about ethanol than anybody. I know more about wind than you do. Nobody knows Nobody knows more about trade than me. Nobody knows the system better than me. Nobody knows the banking industry better than me. Nobody knows more about environmental impact statements than me. Nobody knows more about it than me. Nobody knows it better 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 than me. Project 2025. You publicly said that you don't have any direct connection to nothing. I know nothing about it. I know nothing about Project 25. I know nothing about QAnon. I know nothing about it. I know nothing about the index. I know nothing about WikiLeaks. I have no idea who these women are. I don't know anything about them. I know nothing about white supremacists. I don't know who the Proud Boys are. I don't know anything about David Duke. I know nothing about Hitler. I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about it. I don't know anything about it. I don't know who Little John is. I don't know.
And finally, I want to share this video of entrepreneur Mark Cuban, a real billionaire, a businessman who's actually good at doing business, Donald Trump's worst nightmare, in other words. Here's Mark Cuban explaining why Donald Trump is unqualified to be president. Watch this.
And here's something that just astonished me. When he was going through his trials in New York for misleading on his loan forms, right? During one of the trials, Michael Cohen got up there to testify. And he testified about how Donald Trump asked him to short pay vendors. And he was proud of the fact that he did it for Mr. Trump, as he called him, right? I don't know why, but I expected, how he would hold a little impromptu press conference after each day of the trial. For some reason, I thought he would come out and say, no, I never asked him to short pay vendors. Right? Didn't say a word about it. Probably the worst thing you could say about a business person is he short pays his vendors. He doesn't pay what he owes. That is the ultimate arbiter of trust that you have with any business person. Do they pay you when you do work for them, yes or no? He was proud of the fact. Didn't question it at all. When you rip off hard-working Americans, you are not qualified to be president of the United States of America.
I love these videos so much, and I know that a lot of you aren't on TikTok, so I'm happy to show you what Americans are doing on there. I love to see, people organizing, people getting out to vote, people registering to vote. I love the updates from the ground. I love people speaking their minds, whether it's celebrities like Mark Cuban or whether it's just regular people in this country. It is so great to see that people are not just sitting down, but they're getting up and they're doing something about this election. So I'm going to call on you to do something about this election, and that is ensure that you are registered to vote at vote.org. Ensure that your friends and family are registered to vote. If you already have an absentee ballot, go fill it in. Go do that mail-in ballot. Go get it done. It helps a lot with Get Out the Vote efforts. Additionally, make sure that you are subscribed to the Midas Touch YouTube channel. We are on our way to 3.5 million subscribers, and we can't get there without you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.
Hey, Midas Mighty, love this report. Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram, @MidasTouch. Keep up.
Now, those young men. Okay. No sound, man.
You're watching WHPN, Highland Park, Detroit. FM 88.1 WHPR, Highland Park. WVIE 107.3 FM Charlotte, Amalia, Virgin Islands.
I'm not going to get this other speaker here turned down. I'm not going to I'm not going to prolong this any further tonight. But I admire these young Caucasian like Ben Marcellus and his brothers, but if you don't stand up for your country, you can forget it, man. Most of the Caucasian people that from the historically, they don't listen to black people. It don't make no difference what we tell you, what I stand up here and say. I have yet to see in history where a former slave was accepted by his enslaver as his equal. So, if this country is going to be saved, I can help you, but I can't do it for you. You better stand up and speak up for yourself. You better stand up and speak the truth to those who look like you, just like I speak the truth to those who look like me. I'm not going to stand back and watch black people being misled by black people, and I don't say nothing. Oh yeah, I'm gonna say something. Well, you should not be standing by watching white people be deceived by white people or misled by white people, and you sit there silent or cowering in a corner somewhere. So I'm gonna let that do for now, because I admire them. I admire those that young man. Look, let me tell you something. A man who is satisfied and comfortable in his skin, and when I say that, a man who's comfortable with his own manhood, he don't feel threatened by an intelligent woman. He knows that's no threat to him. An intelligent woman is what an intelligent man hopes he can find. With people who threaten, if you feel threatened because a woman is like many of them showed with Miss Clinton, the problem was she had more sense than most of them men that voted against her. Because anytime you fail to recognize intelligence because it came in a feminine package, that's like refusing to drink water because it came in a canteen rather than a crystal glass. If you're thirsty, if you understood that the container is not the important part, it's the water that was in it. And that young man told the truth when he said this woman worked her way up to where she is. From prosecutor to district attorney to attorney general to senator to vice president to now. If she ain't qualified to be president, who is? I'm not going. No, I ain't going down that road. I ain't going down that road. That the only thing I got to boast of is that my manhood, my masculinity. Hell, that ain't about nothing. If you ain't got no sense with it. Because you're not going to be able to live up to what masculinity is supposed to be. All right. That's enough, ain't it, bro? We go call it a night on that. So let's Let's support that sister. Let's support that qualified woman over an unqualified man. And if all you got to bring, if all Donald Trump bringing to the table is his malehood, that ain't about nothing. Huh? And the man showed me he wasn't much of a man when he told Howard Stern that he could call Ivanka a piece of ass. Yeah, ain't that something to tell another man how he can refer to your daughter as a piece of ass? Oh man. May Allah bless them. Unless somebody had something they want to ask me, I'm gonna let that do for tonight. Brother Michael, Brother Jamar, we still on the air, man?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Nobody had nothing they wanted to ask me. Then we're gonna call it tonight. All right. May Allah bless us and keep us safe and in our right mind. Those of us who receive His word with thanksgiving. And may He grant to us a peaceful and pleasant night's rest and sleep, and a happy, peaceful, and pleasant morning's rise. May Allah's Salam Alaikum.
Conference recording stopped.
These